There are a lot of fake websites on the internet, claiming to have something you desire. 99% of the time these are fake. But what if I told you there is a way to actually get what you desire? But, you are going to pay for it. Not in monetary terms, but instead in emotional and mental terms. First thing, do you really want the thing you desire? This seems redundant, but the pain you will go through will be terrible and beyond anything you can imagine. Also, remember, the more valuable your desire, the more pain you will go through. If you're religious, you will still be able to go to heaven if you are a good person. You will need a computer you can do coding on, nothing more, nothing less. You will need a key from a friend or a person online. Though if it is a false key, you will be sent to hell for an eternity. I beg you not to use a random key found online. Also, you need a strong pair of sunglasses, as well as a smartphone that is fully charged, and that can receive LTE connections from any major phone companies. Even if you can't use the data on full speed, it will be fine. Put all of these items in your pockets. First step, log onto your computer, then make a file. This is simple, make a website about the thing you desire. Even if it's experiential or material, always say it's free. Include an image of what you want, plus a big download button. Link your key to the big download button. The key is weird. It's not a file, but 6 seemingly random digits. Never use a website builder like Weebly or Wix, or even stolen source code. This is a sign of laziness, and you will never make it to the end. Load it up on your computer in an internet browser. An .pdf file will print after pressing the download button. This is the last chance to turn back. Please, if you are not willing to die for this desire, it's not worth it. It says something on it, you have sought an item of sorts. Please sign this note claiming you will partake in the trail to gain your desire. Print out the .pdf file. It doesn't matter where. Just make sure no one sees the page, as this is seen as bragging, and you won't make it. Do not sign on the front. This is a trap to sell your soul to the devil for an eternity. Sign the back side in the top left instead. Go back to the website you created. At this point, email yourself the .html file you created, and you can access it on your phone. Now, change the text in the download button from download to receive. Press it. You will be in the previous location that you were where you pressed the receive button. Now, walk out, and go outside. You are in hell. Don't worry yet. This is your test. If you're not dead yet, congratulations. You beat out 80% of all of the other participants. Most of their wishes were too vast, as you can't trust people to make rational choices when it comes to getting literally anything they want. Walk to a demon and say, "Hello, I am a traveler on a mission." If he responds, "For what?" strip and run back to the house door. You will see what you want, but don't be fooled, this is not what you want. Use anything in your house to destroy it. Even if it's a girl or boy, kill him or her. Once you have destroyed it, kill yourself. If the demon responds, "Follow me," he will lead you to another house, inside is your loved ones. Kill one, he or she will disappear from the earth once you get back. Then, kill yourself. You should be in a dark room. Your worst fear will be in there too. If it's an animal such as a spider or a snake, let it on you, it will not hurt you, I swear. If it's a human such as a clown or something of the sort, don't pay attention to him or her. If it is not a living thing, you will be experiencing it now, such as the fear of heights. If you can bear around 20 minutes in Earth time of this, it will stop. It will be lit very brightly. Close your eyes immediately. Put on your sunglasses. There will be nothing more. Go onto your phone and open the .html website file to the thing you want. Click on Receive. Or if you prefer, you can go onto YouTube and find true enlightenment to your life. And you can buy anything on the internet, but you can only buy one thing. If you did something else on the internet, still press the Receive on the web page. You will be back in our world. The thing you requested will be in front of you, or if it is something big like a car, it's outside. If it was enlightenment, you don't get anything, but you are at peace in the mind. If you wanted a lover, he or she will start to hang out around you more. Also, the key is useless at this point. Erase it and never share it, unless you want to kill someone. Is there anything bad left to do in order to complete it? No, there is not. You're in reality. I hope you enjoy your new gift, from Satan to you. How well do you know the internet? Until 2 weeks ago, I thought I knew it pretty well. After all, I spend a good chunk of my day browsing Reddit and 4chan, and I'm always up to date with the latest memes and circle jerks. I've been a denizen of the internet since the early days of Fortune City pages and IRC channels, and a regular ever since. Then, about a year ago, somebody introduced me to the shadow web, a sort of secret layer of the internet that you will never find by Googling or looking up message boards. There are no links from the surface web to the shadow web. And no, this isn't the deep net, in case you were thinking about that. Not some website with gore videos of freak accidents. I've seen those. I assure you this is something far more twisted. I never asked what his name was. He was a regular who came to the gas station where I worked as an attendant last year. Every time he came in, he would buy $20 to $50 of Ucash vouchers, which I assumed were for porn subscriptions. I think it was a combination of his beige polo shirts and receding hairline that gave off the creepy vibe of a pervert. One day, he asked for $300 of Ucash vouchers, and I made the mistake of raising the question, what for? Have you ever heard of the shadow web? I remember him asking me casually as he counted $300 from a wad of $20 bills. I hadn't, so I shook my head. Then he looked through his wallet and withdrew a little slip, one about the size of a credit card. If you want to find out, he whispered. He leaned towards me and slid the piece of paper into my chest pocket. I gave him his vouchers, he left, and I never saw him again. Not long after, I left the job to return to school. It wasn't until a couple of weeks ago that I came across the old, yellowy uniform with the piece of paper still in the front pocket. When I opened it up and read its content, I immediately recalled my encounter with the creepy customer. The piece of paper had instructions on how to get to the gateway of the shadow web. There were a lot of steps, some more sophisticated than others. Unfortunately, I was both tech-savvy and curious enough to follow them. The first thing you'll want to know about this shadow web is that you do not want to go there. I've seen plenty of fucked up things on the web, but nothing comes remotely close to the things I saw on the SW. Thinking back, I should have noped the fuck out the instant I saw the front page. I don't know why I hadn't. Maybe something is wrong with me. When I got to the gateway page, which resembles one of those welcome pages that pops up when you use the free Wi-Fi at the airport or at the mall, the first thing I noticed was the word corpsefucking. It was underneath a search field among 30 or so other words which I assumed were the most commonly looked up things on the SW, things like skinning and mutilation. That should have been my cue to X out. There were a lot of other things, too, other than sexual content and graphic gore footage. Things like instructions on how to make DIY roadside bombs. Things like a Craigslist for cannibals and people who wanted to be eaten by cannibals. Things like a marketplace to buy and sell stolen identities, either individually or in bulk. I spent almost an hour reading up on leaked war documents and diplomatic cables on a site called avenge.shweb. The website looked very retro, if you know what I mean. The layout had frames and each frame had its own scroll bar. When I found myself clicking on links without thinking twice, I realized I had become comfortable on the shadow web. Don't ask me how I came across this next website. Curiosity got the better part of me, and I clicked on things I shouldn't have. I'll spare you the actual name of site because I know some of you will make the same mistake that I did thinking it can't be that bad. It can. When I got there, I noticed the Ucash logo at the bottom of the page, indicating that paid services were available. It was in fact a live webcam show, but you only paid if you wanted to be the director. Viewing was free. Beneath the live feed of a webcam was the login page to a chat room. It prompted me for a screen name when I clicked on the join button, so I entered AskFast like I always do when commenting on Pornhub or X videos. As soon as I got past the login, a torrent of messages flooded the screen. Most of the messages were in English, a few were in Japanese, and I think some were Arabic or Farsi. The number of participants in the chat room fluctuated between 150 to 200 people, but that's only the number of people who bothered entering the chat. I suspect many more were watching anonymously. The majority of legible messages were "start" or "gogogo" or something to that effect. After about a minute, a man with his face hidden behind a hockey mask appeared on the feed. I remember him having dark brown skin and being really skinny. Like, starving Ethiopian skinny. Shortly after that, everyone was set on mute, everyone except for one user by the name of Italian Goat who I figured was the director of this show. That's when the screaming began. She was blindfolded and tied to a wooden chair with her hands behind her back. A bigger, darker man dragged her by the hair until she sat dead center on my screen. I watched her try to struggle free from the ropes, but she was so tightly fastened that you could see the bruising. God knows how long she had been tied up like that. Finally, the bigger man took the blindfold off, and she stopped screaming. When she looked into the camera, she seemed to realize what was about to happen. She started crying and begging the two men in what I think was Arabic. Then a message popped up on the chat. Italian Goat, lay her sideways on the floor. The director issued his first command. The skinny man saw the message and relayed it to the bigger man in their own language. Italian Goat, kick her in the stomach. The skinny man continued with his translations. Italian Goat, kick her in the face. The screaming got louder and louder. What the fuck was I watching? That was it for me. I reached for my cell phone, ready to dial 911. Italian Goat, stomp on her tits. Italian Goat, tell your friend to kick harder, I paid good money for this. I was in so much shock at this point that I couldn't take my eyes off of the screen. The kicking went on for another 10, 20, 30 seconds. It seemed as if it went on forever. Italian Goat, now slit her throat. When I read that last message, the churning feeling in my guts intensified. No, 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 I kept thinking, somebody stop this. I tried to type into the chat, but the input field was grayed out. The woman cried even louder when she heard the man relay the last request. Italian Goat, wait, no, not yet. The skinny man held one hand up to signal his partner to halt. My breathing returned to normal for a second, thinking the woman was spared. At least for the time being. Then the director continued. Italian goat, take out her eyes first. The skinny man stared directly into the webcam. I couldn't see the entirety of his face, just his eyes and the small patch of skin around each one. In his eyes I searched desperately for the slightest hint of hesitation. Please, put a stop to this, I prayed, but I kept the mouse cursor hovered above the close button in case they did not. And then, the skinny man began typing, and a second screen name popped up on the log. Admin, another $500. My mind froze when I saw the number. $500. This woman was being tortured and possibly killed for a meager sum of $500. I was making as much every other week at the gas station, and I was barely making minimum wage. If I could offer $1,000 to stop this, I would. I would empty out my savings account if it meant saving her life. I would, I swear on my life. I'd pay anything to stop this madness. Italian goat, okay. I quickly shut off the screen before I could see any more. I wish my common sense could have kicked in earlier. I ran out to the yard where I regurgitated about 2 meals worth of vomit. It had been a long time since I've felt this sick from watching something. When I was in junior high, some friends showed me a clip from Rotten.com. It was the one where a man had his skull sliced in half by the rotor blades of a helicopter he was in the midst of repairing. And then, over the years, I've seen many more videos like that one, enough that I don't get the urge to puke in my mouth anymore. But let me tell you this, seeing a live footage of a real person being tortured is stomach-turning on a whole different level. When I was done spitting out the last bits of bile in my mouth, I heard screaming coming from my room. It was then I realized that in my haste to turn the monitor off, I had forgotten to turn the speakers off as well. Her screams got worse and worse, until finally I was able to reach behind the desk and disconnect the speakers from the computer. The silence that followed was unbearable. It was as if by my own hands I had silenced her, killed her. I felt remorse such as I have never felt before. I killed her, I thought to myself again and again. I killed her. The feeling was unreal. I had to find out if she was alive. As I reached over to turn the screen back on, a voice inside my head begged me to stop. I do not want to see what I'm about to see. But before I could stop myself, my hand had already acted. The image on the screen was an image I will never, ever forget. The severed head of the woman sat there straight across from me, both eyes missing from their respective sockets. That face, that warped, misshapen face have haunted me ever since. Even now as I write this, I can feel her hollow eyes glaring at me from behind. I sleep with all the lights on, the TV on, but nothing helps. Right before I shut down the browser and reconfigured the network settings to access the good old regular internet, I remember seeing one last line on the chat line. It is easy for the lost and the outcasts to find solace in technology. When you are lonely, you grab hold of anything that grants you comfort and eases your pain. Robert was such a person. He spent his days on forums and comment sections seeking out validation in his existence. He has never met his closest friends, they exist only as words on a screen. You can find the worst and best of humanity on the web. However, people like Robert rarely seek out the best. They spiral down dark corners looking at things worse than themselves. That is where he met John. Robert did not know much about John other than that he was a cynical person who enjoyed talking about the downfall of society and failings of mankind. He showed Robert images. Pictures of people in pain, or dying. Pictures of monks lighting themselves on fire, of little girls trapped in a flood. They were images meant to elicit a certain type of emotion, despair. Robert and John spoke to each other for nearly a month since the first meeting. Robert became fast friends with John and started to adopt many of his nihilistic views. As John had planned, Robert truly grew tired of his life and humanity around him, and like a predator stalking prey, John carefully waited for the moment to strike. "What if you could escape this reality?" John asked. "That'd be nice," Robert agreed. "All you have to do is agree and I can show you something," John replied. "What are you talking about?" "Whatever, show me," Robert finished. Rob immediately felt a dizzying sensation as the lights went out around him. For a moment the world went black, then his eyes adjusted to the dark. He was still sitting at his keyboard, but the screen had no power along with the computer. He tried switching the computer back on, but it was useless. The desk lamp next to him also failed to turn on. He stumbled around his dark house till he found the front door. He looked outside to find that every house around him was much the same. No lights, no power. The streetlights were out as well. A blackout, he thought to himself. However, he saw no one else. It was cold, and the world seemed to glow lightly with the light of the moon, but he could see no moon or stars. Walking outside, Rob could not escape the feeling of everything being slightly wrong. Walking to his car, he noticed the color seemed slightly off and the body felt cheap. Like a poor imitation of what it should be. The sidewalk, street lamps, and even the windows of the houses and cars all seemed like cheap imitations of the real thing. Like a Chinese knockoff of a whole town. This surreal world only grew odder with the lack of the wind and any noise outside his own footsteps. Rob walked the streets of this imitation world for several hours, or at least what felt like hours, as the passage of time seemed impossible to tell. It wasn't till he saw a light at the end of an empty road did he have a direction. At first, it was simply a glow in the distance, but as he approached he could make out the shape of a monitor. In the middle of the road sat a computer on a desk. The only thing with any power for miles. This world seemed like a dream. Slight imperfections giving away hints that this was not his reality. None more so than the glowing computer screen that sat on a desk in front of him. On the screen was only a basic text program with a line of text blinking, waiting for a response. "Hello, again, Robert." Rob instantly knew it was John. "Where am I?" Rob reached down to the keyboard and typed. "You are still home," John immediately typed back. "However, I suppose that is not what you wanted to hear. Your body is home, your mind is in another reality just like you asked," John continued. "As long as you are not using your body, I will take it in the meantime. Enjoy the peace, Robert," John finished. As the last words appeared on the screen, the power went out. The glow was replaced with darkness. Robert desperately tried to type back and turn on the computer, but it was useless. Once again Rob was left alone in this dark world. He had no sense of time and was unsure how long he had been there. The only thing he could think to do was walk. He tried opening doors to surrounding buildings, but they were sealed shut like they were never meant to be opened. Windows only showed near empty insides with furniture that looked fit for a model house. He kept walking, never feeling tired or hungry, as surely hours must have passed. It was as he walked that he found a small gray building fitted with a red door that looked completely out of place in this world. On the door, a white piece of paper with the words, "Keep Out," in black ink sat. Robert ignored the warning without any hesitation and opened the door, revealing a completely dark room. The horrible smell of rot and death reached out. Still, without hesitation, Rob stepped into the room, and as his eyes adjusted he could see what was making the smell. The building was one impossibly large room, like some sort of warehouse, with concrete floors. Stacked in the center were dead bodies, all in deep stages of decomposition. Skin hung from them like leather. Robert, you should learn to read signs. No need to look on at your predecessors, a voice rang in Robert's head. The smell began to overpower Rob, causing him to flee. As he walked away from the building, the red door slammed shut behind him. Unable to work up the nerve to try the door again, Rob walked away. He found himself wandering endlessly in a daze. He no longer recognized any of the scenery. Architecture and age seemed to change rapidly. Buildings and styles years apart sat next to each other. Yet, it all seemed fake. Like props on a movie set, they could pass for the real thing from afar but fail on close inspection. He could not escape the feeling of being watched as he moved along. Continuing his journey, Robert noticed other red doors like the one he saw before. They did not have any signs on them, but he still hesitated to touch them. His courage from before had faded. However, as time passed and any other options failed to reveal themselves, he decided to try. The closest door was attached to an old stone building that seems fit for a long-lived city like New York or Philadelphia. Slowly opening the door, he saw a deep darkness in what appeared to be a glass door holding it back, but it was not glass but a perfect slice of water. With a touch, Rob could feel water drip onto his skin, but the larger mass refused to fall out the door. With a deep breath, he smelled the nostalgic scent of the sea. Daring not to enter, Robert moved on, looking for another door. Another red door sat attached to a wooden cabin. A building completely out of place, sitting between two brick buildings. Slowly opening it, Rob shielded his eyes as bright sunlight spilled out. Inside the door, a vast savanna spread out before him. A dry golden grass seemed to go on for miles, only broken by the occasional small tree. He had ever only seen such a thing on TV and pictures of Africa. Looking at the gray world behind him and the golden one before him, Robert stepped through the door. The first thing to hit Rob was the oppressive heat. The change was drastic from the cold world behind him. Looking back, the door he stepped through seemed to sit attached to nothing. The world was much different than the one before. If the world before was a dream, this one was more a vivid memory. A sense of odd nostalgia entered Robert's mind. Walking forward into the endless plains, the red door behind him vanished. Despite the heat, he still did not feel thirst, hunger, or exhaustion. He was fascinated by the vastness of the world before him. Besides the vegetation, not another living thing seemed to exist. That was why when he noticed the grass moving in front of him, his eyes focused immediately. Time seemed to slow as a female lion burst out of the grass and sprinted at him at full speed. Rob only had time enough to turn away before it reached him and pounced on him, hugging and grappling onto him with sharp claws. He hit the ground with a hard thud, as his vision went black. A few moments later, Robert was able to open his eyes once more. However, he was unable to move. He did not feel any pain but could hear the sounds of footsteps as the lion moved into his view. It looked into his eyes before opening its jaws and reaching down to bite him in the throat. He awoke once more on the cold streets of the gray world before, gasping for breath. A dark voice laughed in Rob's head once more. "Curiosity can be a dangerous thing, Robert. It killed the cat after all," John said with a laugh. "I am about done on this side. You will be home soon enough. You were a good sport, so perhaps I'll sate your curiosity a bit." The red door before him opened again. This time, a different scene lay before him. A vast village made of sandstone sitting under a bright sun. "I am old Robert, very old." The door closed again as John spoke, only to open again. This time to a small computer server room. Electronics in black boxes lined the wall while a single computer screen and keyboard sat on a desk at the end. "However, even old things can adapt to the age, Robert. It's time now, I can't stay here for long." The voice of John spoke for the last time. The human body simply can't handle it. The world around Rob started to fade, his vision blurred. It turned black with a familiar dizzying sensation. When light entered his eyes once more, he found himself in a cold wooded area. Rob tried to center himself, but he did not have the energy to stand. He was desperately thirsty, his whole body felt dry. When he finally glanced at his arms, he tried to scream, but his dry throat could not get a sound out. He could see his bones with leathery skin hanging off of them. The last of his energy left him as he collapsed completely to the grass floor. His eyes quickly dried to the point he could no longer move them, not a tear could escape. His body was already a long dead corpse that would never move again. Tap hit the shoulder of Curtis' coat as a single raindrop from the dark cloudy sky made its landing. She knew it was going to rain today. She was not complaining, as she always enjoyed the rain. Leaves crunched beneath her steps as she finally finished walking through the narrow alleyway and made her exit onto the street near the clock tower. The bell chimed tenfold right on cue as Curtis watched a lean man in black enter the cafe. The instructions Curtis had been given were vague, but easy: go to the timeless cafe just before 10 p.m., wait for the target, and then take him out at your own leisure before 11 o'clock. She was no stranger to easy contracts. This world was a cruel one, and in the grim work of assassination easy money was not hard to find. Curtis did not find the job to be too complicated. All assassination requires is common sense, a means of murder, an unsuspecting target, and someone to pay for the deed. To make her job even easier, Curtis gained all of her contracts online through the deep web from those that wanted people in her home city dead. The concept of anonymity among her employers was a bit unsettling to her at first, but she had become used to it. A faceless text under a funny username would give her a location, name, and conditions for the assassination. To make things even easier, she was often paid up front. Sometimes if the contract called for conditions too demanding, her untraceable identity on the dark web allowed her to simply accept the money and not make the kill. However, on nights like this one, Curtis would be given a contract so easy that it would just be pure laziness to not follow through with it. Curtis' target was seated near the window of the cafe where he placed his order. He began reading from a brown book while he waited, and minutes later was brought out a plate containing various breakfast foods. Curtis' phone vibrated, prompting her to reach into her coat pocket. "Is he in the cafe?" the text from her anonymous employer read. "He's enjoying his last meal," she quickly replied. Curtis placed her phone back into her pocket and walked over to the nearby coffee stand, purchased her favorite latte, and sat in the bus stop across from the cafe. She pretended to be browsing the web on her phone as she was able to stealthily observe the man she would soon be killing. After about 20 minutes had passed since his arrival, the man finished his meal and then returned to reading as he sipped his coffee in unorganized intervals. Curtis walked over to the nearest trash can, tossed her empty cup, and made her way back to her seat. She watched him finish up and pay the waitress as she wondered what this guy had done to make someone want to kill him. As the man walked out the cafe door, Curtis checked her phone again. "It's been over half an hour. Is he dead yet?" the text message from her employer read. She quickly replied to the text with an "about to be" as she watched the man with the corner of her eye. The man pulled his hood over his head, checked his watch, and began slowly walking down the street after sliding his hands into his coat pockets. Curtis waited and watched as the target walked and put a bit of distance between them. Curtis thought to herself about how easy this would be as she took her first step forward and maintained a pace slow enough to not be noticed, yet would not allow the target out of her sights. Her phone vibrated. "Better kill him soon," she read as she noticed the time was 10:46. After a while of walking through the near desolate street, he made a quick turn into an alleyway. Perfect, a subtle smile formed on her lips. However, Curtis turned into the alleyway only to watch her target disappearing around another corner. She quickened her pace. The rain became heavier. She couldn't lose him, the payout was too great for such an easy target. As she reached the corner and focused her eyes down the narrow space, she swore under her breath when he was nowhere to be seen. How the hell? Curtis couldn't believe it. No way did he already walk all the way down the alleyway. Unless he had been running. Curtis began jogging down the alley. Her jog growing into more of a sprint as she came to the realization that the target may have been onto her. Damn it, damn it, damn it, she cursed herself for being so arrogant. Curtis turned the next corner, venturing deeper and deeper into the nearly lightless alleyways. She could find no traces. The alley was silent enough for her to hear the vibration of her phone this time. She slid her hand into her pocket and lifted up the device. Too late. Without warning, a sudden pressure struck Curtis in the back. The woman cried out in agony as the pressure transitioned into a sharp pain. She felt the blade exit her back. Just as she felt the blood begin to pour, the pistol hidden in her sleeve slid into her hand as she quickly spun around to face her attacker. Her firing arm was caught as she met the frigid red eyes of her masked assailant. The now familiar sharp sensation pierced the side of her abdomen. Though his face was covered, she could feel the masked figure staring directly into her eyes without remorse. Curtis dropped to her knees, the rain puddle beneath her now gathering a deep red. As she looked up at the shaded silhouette, she noticed something. The clothes, the hood. This was him. This was her target. You made this all too easy. I'm disappointed, his icy voice given a slight echo from beneath his mask. He tossed a cell phone in front of her, the screen revealing that she had been directed to walk right into this. Curtis reached for the gun she had dropped only to feel the crushing sensation of the masked figure's boot coming down hard on her wrist, the loud crunch and sweltering pain hinting it to now be broken. You didn't think you could accept a payment and just walk away, did you? He continued crushing her wrist, his boot stepping down harder and mangling it even further. What more to expect from such an amateur, his gloved fist clenching. Curtis screamed briefly before being silenced by knuckles to her jaw. Guess it all caught up to you. Guess you let your guard down. He stepped off of her now shattered wrist. As the blood filled her mouth, Curtis had to know. "WH. What's going on?" the poor girl managed to mutter out. "They hired me. I hired you. Now I stand before a dead woman," he spoke as she regretted her conceit. Her eyes followed a passing brown leaf from the autumn night before focusing on the assassin's blade, the edges dripping with her very own blood. The bell chimed as the distant clock tower struck 11 p.m., her hour of exodus and the last sound she would ever hear.
What do you do when there is nothing else left? I was a college graduate who, 2 years after collecting my certificate, was still unemployed. There was a gaping blank on my resume. Add to that the fact that my debts were out of control, and it's fair to say I was a mess, and growing ever more desperate. So what was I doing about this? How was I digging myself out of a hole? I was staying up all night trolling through the internet. Is there a point at which the internet does end and sanity begins? I neither knew nor cared. I watched thousands of clips, read conspiracy theories and news reports until they blurred into one stream of hyperbole. I slept fitfully during the day, and went back online the minute I woke up. I would surf, even though I needed to go to the bathroom, until it hurt. I forgot to eat or drink, and soon I had a permanent background headache. Like a lot of addicts, it was not long before I moved on to the harder stuff, the deep web. I was sickened by a lot of what I saw, but still immersed myself more and more. When I stumbled across the site that changed my life, it looked fairly innocuous at first. There was a simple hero image of the outline of a human body, and a drop-down menu in the top right-hand side accessed via 3 short lines. For other people it's one more bet, one more drink. I clicked on one more link. I was surprised to see only 2 options, buyer and seller. I wasn't going to be buying anything real soon, so I followed the Warren Marks seller. This sub-menu left me open-mouthed. It listed items that could be sold and gave the price the seller would receive. All I needed to do was add details for my preferred way to receive payment, then tick the box next to the item. The first item on the list was likeness. For the price shown, I could pay the 2 months I was overdue on my rent, and buy wine and pizza every night for a week with what was left over. Now I was not sure what was meant by likeness. Other items that I could sell via the website were more straightforward. Things like my social security number, my date of birth, even my name. A lot of these seemed like a way to commit fraud for the buyers. All very dubious, but at least, I thought, they were paying to use these details, rather than simply stealing them as so often happened. Likeness seemed more ethereal though. I decided it meant the right to use my image. A photograph of my face. I also decided I really wanted a beer and pizza, and to be able to tell my landlord to get off my back, because I have paid your damn rent. I added my details for the money transfer and ticked the box next to likeness. Press submit. A transaction processing symbol turned into transaction complete. A new box appeared giving me the option to comment. I typed, "Do you need me to send you my photograph?" thinking this would answer my question about what exactly I had just sold. A moment later the reply came. "We already have it." I flashed back to some of the things I had done in front of the computer screen, then decided I would rather not think about it. Feeling nervous, sure I was being scammed, about to kick myself for being so naive, I checked my balance. What do you know? The money was in there. I went back to the good old innocent web and ordered the largest, most overloaded pizza I could think of, then began to add sides. It took 2 weeks for me to blow the money from selling my likeness. I had had a great time, without leaving my apartment, and I had paid no rent. Not to worry, I told myself, and returned to the deep web and my new favorite website. This time, I hovered over fingerprints. 30 seconds considering, flagged a dozen dodgy things this could lead to, but it was the money I would make that made me think, whatever. I ticked and submitted. This time 10 small boxes appeared on screen with an instruction for me to place the ends of my fingers in them. Which I did, and within seconds the transaction was complete, and within minutes I could see that I was once again flush. Problems over. I could pay my rent and enough off a credit card to make that bank back off. In the comment box I typed, "Thank you." The reply was almost immediate, "You are welcome." Now, I don't know if anyone reading this is a gambler. But I guess if they are, they would not by now have put money on me spending the money wisely. And they would be right. This time, I told myself another couple of weeks later, I would get my act in gear. I spent significant time going through the items I could sell and created a spreadsheet with how much I owed, so I knew the amount I needed to earn with this one final sale a part of me. I had decided, you see, that this had to be the last time. There was a relatively small number of things left I could sell, that I was prepared to sell. My name, date of birth, and social security number were still no-goes. I did not want to risk losing the ability to have a bank account and find employment. A history of being a disaster did not mean, in my mind, that I always would be. So, one final sale it was, then clear my debts and find a job. I ticked a box next to sell body part. From the next list, ticked kidney. I was close to hyperventilating when I pressed submit. Close to tears not long afterwards, when I checked my balance. I felt a huge pressure being lifted. With this money I could finally get my life back on track. The comment box already had text in it. I had been too worked up to read it, so I took a deep breath and did. It was an 8-digit reference number, an address and a time later that day. An appointment for me to have my kidney removed, I figured. I considered not going. I already had the money, so why bother? Then I thought back to the message telling me they already had my photograph. Whoever ran the website probably knew where I lived as well, or could easily find out. It was not rocket science to work out that they were probably bad people, criminals, some kind of gang. Not people to cross or mess with. I felt sick as I left the apartment at the prospect of having an operation, but also elated at the amazing things lying ahead for me. I just needed to get this over with. The address turned out to be a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. The windows were all shuttered and there was no signage, just a human outline I recognized from the website. The keypad was fixed into the wall next to a sturdy-looking door. Not sure what else to do, I entered my reference number. The door slid open with a sigh. My stomach doing backflips, I stepped inside. I could hear the drone of an air conditioner, but still suddenly felt very hot. Nerves, I told myself. Totally natural. I seemed to be in some kind of reception area, but it was deserted. Scratch that. A man appeared. He was wearing a white overall and mask and safety glasses. He may or may not have been smiling when he said, "Welcome, let's get you prepped." I followed him along the long corridor. The walls were blank, whitewashed, and the smell of antiseptic was growing stronger. Eventually, he turned off into a small windowless room. I hesitated on the threshold. There was a raised table, fluorescent strips overhead. A stack of equipment next to the bed. Medical, I guessed, though I had no idea. "Please," the man said and gestured that I should come in. I smiled weakly and did. He gave me a robe to put on and turned to do something to the equipment while I got changed. I assumed I needed to lie on the table, and when he looked round from whatever it was he had been doing and saw me, he said, "Good." Made me feel like a dog rolling over and playing dead, but I kept this to myself. I did though have some questions. "Is this safe?" I asked. "Perfectly," he replied without missing a beat. I wasn't sure. I felt hot to the point where I thought I was going to faint. And the lighting overhead was flickering, making pain start to flower above my eyes. "I'm not sure I want to go ahead with this," I said. "There is nothing to be concerned about," he replied, and, before I realized what was happening, had nicked the skin of my neck with a needle. I immediately felt an unpleasant tingling sensation, and a numbness began to spread up into my face. He picked up a tablet computer that was resting among the equipment, and studied it for a moment before turning back to look at me and asking, "Now, which eye would you like to keep?" "What?" I exclaimed, or tried to, because my lips were numb and a word came out slurred. "What are you talking about?" I managed. "I sold one of my kidneys, not my eyes." I did not wait for an answer. I was horrified and decided I wanted out of there. I tried to sit up, but the numbness had spread to my spine, and then my arms. I was helpless to do anything but lie there, and watch as he once more studied the tablet. No, he said in a quiet, relaxed voice. "The records show that you agreed to sell a body part, but did not specify which one." "I took kidney," I tried to say, but by now my mouth would not move, and I could not feel my tongue. I could feel my heart beating faster and faster, felt like I could not breathe. Cold sweat trickled down into my eyes, blurring my vision. I could see this. I could not feel it. I wanted to scream. Wanted to cry out in terror. But my jaws were locked, my limbs useless. All I could do was watch as the scalpel came into view, and as he lowered it slowly towards my left eye. "It will all be over soon," he said, and then the blade became a shadow over my eye, a darkness that was soon all I could see. That was then. This is now. I am writing this in an internet cafe, after trashing my laptop's hard drive and ditching it. There's just me in here and the owner. I think he would like me to leave from the dirty looks he is giving me. But before I head off, I have one more thing to do. I have enough money to buy a coach ticket and go a long way from here, away from everything and everyone I have ever known. I have just logged onto the site and found what I am looking for in the seller menu. Name, date of birth, social security number. I tick sell on all three, enter the details in the boxes that pop up, press submit, and moments later the money is in my account. I have been withdrawing as much cash I can daily, and after I go across the road to the ATM and withdraw the latest amount, I will snap my card in half and throw it away. Only, the screen has changed, the comment box has opened up, and a new message has appeared. We like and follow you. I feel tears begin to flow from the eye they did not take. I used to be a normal person. I just want to get that out clear first of all. Yeah, I had a few strange hobbies, but when this all started out I was just like your average Joe. One of my strange hobbies was browsing the deep web. It was mostly out of curiosity, let me assure you. I wasn't involved in anything shady and also made sure to take adequate precautions. One day I was just looking at random web pages when I stumbled upon a curious one. Hello there. Are you perhaps interested in buying other people's souls? I've been collecting people's souls for a very long time, and I have a bit extra. It was one of the most basic web pages that you could imagine, with only an address on where to send the Bitcoin to buy one. I laughed when I saw this. I had seen my share of scams on the deep web, but this one was new. I went to close the window before something popped up on my screen. Hello there. I see you're browsing my site. My heart nearly froze as I saw it was a chat box. But I was sure the security measures I had taken were sufficient to prevent someone from tracking me or hacking into my computer. How did this pop-up appear out of nowhere then? Relax. I just noticed that you were going to leave without buying anything. It seems you haven't been convinced what I'm selling is real. Why not try a free sample? A simple yes and no dialog box appeared. Now, I should have clicked on no, but in my curiosity, I clicked on yes. A bad decision in hindsight, but I wanted to know where this was going. It's rather hard to explain what possessing a soul is like. You probably think that a soul is immutable or indestructible, in other words. And you'd be right. In that moment I could tell in my head that I held a single soul. But there was a way for me to manifest it in the real world. It appeared as a tiny ball of light no bigger than the smallest bone in your pinky. I reached out to touch it, and a flood of memories entered my head. The soul was of a woman by the name of Alexandra Cortez. She had not had a very happy childhood, and had escaped her home when she turned 16. A few bad decisions involving drugs and she had literally nothing left on her, and was slowly dying. It was here that her memories became less clear. There was a strange shadow that I could see, but nothing clearer than that. Mind you, everything else that I could see had been as clear as if I was the one seeing it. But this figure was covered in what I could only describe as dark smog. She had sold her soul to this thing in exchange for money. The rest of her life was rather good, not fantastic by any means, but it was still decent, and paradise compared to what she had suffered earlier. It all ended one day, when she was walking along a dark street corner and a man ambushed her. She died that night, though not the 4 hours of torture at his hands. There was far more. Of course I had her entire life in my hands, but I only put down the important bits given her whole biography could fill up several books. That wasn't all though. I could hear her thoughts as I held her soul in my hand. She was pleading, begging me to let her go. Now, you're probably wondering what the afterlife is like. I have to confess that I never found out, just that there was something beyond where souls could go to. After listening to her pleadings I agreed to let her go. Much as I said earlier, I can't really explain how I let her go, just that I did. She vanished before me, and the light also went away with her, leaving my mind completely clear. I thought what had happened was just some sort of odd hallucination, or rather, I hoped that that was what it was. I didn't want to believe there was some monster collecting souls around on the internet. That was until 4 days later when I got an anonymous email linking back to that site. Hello there. I hope you enjoyed your free sample. Perhaps you would like to purchase another. We're having a sale now. The mail confirmed for me that it wasn't some weird fever dream, and after a moment's hesitation, I decided to make an actual purchase. I should have realized that something was wrong the moment I saw the prices. They were dirt cheap, which made very little sense given what I learned later on. I got the souls of 3 more women and they were quite similar in many ways. Much like with Alexandra, I couldn't see the entity they sold their souls to properly. The amounts of money they got for their souls were quite staggering. I had barely paid 0.00001% of that price. Again, that should have told me that something was off about this whole thing, but I was rather oblivious to the fact then. What I was more focused on was that they had all died in similar ways, by being ambushed by a man. They never saw his face though, but they had all died in agonizing ways. Letting their souls go free brought a certain peace to my mind. Kind of like animal rights activists who buy animals intended for slaughter and then release them, I guess. Except I was releasing these human souls from damnation. I highly doubted that whatever entity bought them in the first place was kind to them. I bought another one a few days afterward, and it was here that things took a dark turn. It was the soul of a man named Christopher. I don't want to share his full name here, but that hadn't even been what I had been concentrating on at the time. No, when I went through the memories of his life, I was sickened by what I saw. This man was a serial killer. Those 4 women I told you about earlier. He was the one who had killed them. He had done it to over 17 more. The mere thought of it made me want to throw up. Again, I couldn't see the figure to whom he sold his soul to. He hadn't done it for money, no, he had been caught by the police, and had exchanged his soul for getting out of jail. Some sort of legal loophole was there because the police didn't document a piece of evidence correctly, and he was let go. And he killed again. And again. 10 more victims before being caught and given the death penalty. Much like those before him, he begged to be released. But no sort of compassion emerged in my mind. I was sickened by what he had done and appalled that he had suffered so little compared to his victims. In my rage, I took hold of his soul and wondered what I could do with it. I could now hear him pleading again in my mind, but I ignored that and lit the stove. I then dropped a small ball of light onto the flame. Oh, he definitely felt that. He couldn't die, but he could feel the flame consume him. I could hear his screams, and though at first I was disgusted with myself, I learned to live with it. This man had no regrets or remorse for what he had done aside from the fact that he was dead. It became a daily routine for me. I would try to find new ways to torment him. I would stick him in my freezer. I would stab his soul with a knife. I even thought about buying acid from somewhere to dip him in, but that would have raised too many questions. I never really considered myself to be a vindictive person. I think it was because I had been so close to some of his victims, and had felt all they felt when they died, that I did what I did. Eventually, I got tired of this after a few weeks and let him go, but in case you're worried, I assure you he suffered 10 times worse than what he had dealt out. I then bought another soul a couple of weeks later. This one belonged to a woman who had killed 3 of her own children. My heart was hardened from before, and I went about my way making sure she got what she deserved. It continued like that. Nearly every soul that I bought was some sort of horrible criminal. I didn't get any innocents to release like I did earlier. Soon, my apartment had over 24 of them. I spent nearly every free waking hour tormenting them as much as I could. It was more addicting than anything I had ever tried before. Eventually, I ran into a small roadblock, though the prices for the souls increased exponentially. I should add, they were worth right about how much they should have been. I had already released a good number and was quite frustrated that I couldn't get my hands on some more. I got an email a few days after that. Hey there, champ. Seems that you're a bit short on cash lately, but since you've been such a great customer, I was thinking that you could have a few of them for free. With a few strings attached, of course. I barely even read the conditions as I agreed to it. That was just how much I was hooked. Now, I have over 100 souls. I spend all of my time dealing with them. It's strange, but I don't think I've eaten something in the past few months. I haven't even gone to work, and I thought they'd kick me out of my apartment for non-payment of rent one day, but they haven't. I have noticed a few changes when it comes to my body as well. There are 2 small bumps on the top of my head that won't go away. I've been meaning to go to a doctor, but haven't found the time. My skin has turned a different color as well, and I feel something growing out of my back. But really, I can't be bothered with all of that. A new shipment of souls has come from the website, and I need to get to work on them. I wish I'd never watched that video. I thought I'd grow out of shit like that by the time I'd hit 20. Yet there I was, off my tits on some choice MDMA Jeff hooked us up with. Turning through some kind of hardcore sadomasochism site. The kind of videos you're surprised aren't on the dark web. If you ever stumbled across the Pain Olympics or 4chan, you'll know what I'm talking about. When I was a teenager, mates and I would gather round a PC screen, playing chicken to see who could watch the most extreme content without leaving the room or puking. This was like that, but with a tablet, and nobody is sober. In my defense, it wasn't my idea. Luke's cousin was down for the weekend. Young lad, about 16 I think. Not too bright, but kept himself to himself. Which meant he wasn't going to get us caught sneaking him into the rave underage. As usual, afterwards we found ourselves at a flat party, and then in Luke's bedroom. It wasn't until about 4 am, when those who were able had sauntered off to get laid, that the usual rounds of spliff and internet began. This was when Luke's cousin started suggesting weirder and weirder shit. We all thought at first that it was just a Mandy. He was young after all, and teenage desire to be seen as edgy mixed with calm-down anxiety was a plausible explanation. After a while though, one of us, I was too fucked to remember who, but I hope it wasn't me, started to entertain his suggestions. Everybody there enjoyed horror films after all. We had more than one forum saw our hostel marathon after a night out. What was the harm? Soon enough we found ourselves at the familiar group Cringe, and there was then, of course, the unending debate over whatever macabre footage we just put ourselves through was real. Luke's cousin was in control by that point. We hadn't noticed how quiet he'd gotten. He sat there on the floor, legs crossed, leaning forward every so often to click the next video. Had this look on his face the whole time, like he was searching for something specific. He never skipped anything though. No matter what the video showed, he just sat back, watching whatever it was making the rest of us make melodramatic retching noises unfold. Once one video finished, he scoured the algorithm's suggestions for the next. He'd ignored all of ours by this point, so we'd stopped bothering. We were more than a few blunts into our session, and holding our focus on anything other than the rich conversation about which of the girls we knew would be a good smash was difficult. I remember him sighing disappointedly at every video he found, except for the last. When he found that one, he licked his lips, rocking slightly. He must have known. No way the creepy little fuck found it by accident. When he clicked play, we all knew this one was going to be different. I'm not sure how. Call it instinct. Something was off about it, which when you consider the kind of website we were surfing said a lot. Before the footage started, the rest of us had been laughing and joking in a blunt smoked haze. The vibe of the room switched in less than a heartbeat. The moment sound started to seep from the tinny speaker, every chemically stimulated mind enraptured by the figure on the 12-inch tablet screen. It was a girl. Younger than us, but older than Luke's cousin. Pretty, but not in the conventional sense. I say pretty because she wasn't exactly hot. Not the kind of looks you try and buy a drink. She had a pleasantness to the eye that I can't really put in words. To describe her would make her sound plain, almost ugly. Drooping cheeks, large eyes surrounded by makeup done a little too much, lipstick ever so just the wrong shade of red. Hair that had been brushed but was in obvious need of a wash. Not the sort of girl I'd give a second or third look under any other circumstance. In that smoky room she was all I could think about. The first 2 minutes of footage were her staring at the camera in front of a grey wall. The shot was well lit, and the camera was expensive. All the lines and imperfections of her face were visible. Her mic was clearly pricey, too. When she finally parted her lips, the sound of them peeling apart was quite audible. The breaths between her words came through as though she were in the room with us. She talked for a whole 5 minutes, before anything interesting happened. I don't know when the lads had last focused on something for that long at that time in the morning. Maybe never. Luke, Hunt, Jack, Lyle, and I all sat on the mattress and beanbags, hypnotized by the movement of her puffed lips, whispering semi-nonsense at us. She spoke a lot about necessity and excess, about evolution and optimization, deconstruction and renewal. Subjects that didn't really seem to be linked to me at the time. It goes without saying I understand it all now, but then it just came across as meaningless word salad. It didn't matter. I would have listened to that face read even something as dull as the Bible for 500 years if given the chance. She said her last words and held up a potato peeler. I didn't think much of it. I was too lost in those dark eyes of hers. She asked us all to remember that everything we do is to achieve perfection. Something like that, at least. The exact phrasing doesn't matter, it's the idea that counts. Perfection. The room, with the exception of Luke's cousin, jumped in unison when the footage cut to black. The switch was accompanied with a loud crash, the sound of something heavy landing on the lowest notes of a grand piano. You can try this at home. The words appeared letter by letter in a white typewriter font. Sporadic detuned piano notes played over the scrolling text, along with muffled grunts and the scraping bangs of God knows what being dragged across the floor. The hair on my arms stood on end. I wasn't grinning and laughing anymore. I was still high, but barely. From the quick glances I exchanged with the rest of the lads I could tell they were in a similar state. Everybody except Luke's cousin, of course. The camera had been moved about 10 feet away from the woman. For some reason this didn't affect the definition of her face. The wrinkles of her top lip, the poorly concealed spot on her nostril, the blobs left over from over-generous application of eyeliner and mascara, all were just as clear as when she had been a few inches from the screen. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her drooping cheeks were slick with tears, and they wobbled in time with the trembling of her jaw. Her large eyes stared into the camera, into us, pleading for help. Both sides of the screen knew wasn't coming. She was still holding the potato peeler next to her head. Unlike her bottom lip, her grip was steady. We could see her clothes now, too. She was wearing a skirted suit. And an expensive one at that. My plan for after uni was to go into banking. I'm versed enough in tailoring to recognize quality fabric when I see it. The sobbing woman had on the uniform of the financially successful. The men stood either side of her were naked. They were each a few feet taller than her. An impressive feat, since even though she was sat down, you could tell the woman was tall. The length of her slender legs was a testament to this. How their stubby legs supported their weight was a mystery to me. The hanging belly flap almost touched the floor. Their skin shone with grease, sweat and dirt. And were it not for the fact I knew it's impossible, I would have sworn under oath that I could smell the pungent odor of curdled milk whenever I looked at either of them for too long. The one to her left was holding a transparent bucket filled with a clear liquid that I hoped was water. To her right was a silver tray. I can't comment on what the men looked like. I couldn't see their faces through the orange shopping bags over their heads. The cheap plastic was fastened in place with about a half-dozen zip ties round each man's neck, the crinkled skin pulled so taut that the shapes of their faces were visible. A pair of orange-bound skulls on the peaks of twin mountains of glistening flesh. The only movement from either was the steady in out of the bag being pushed and pulled by labored breaths. The letters didn't scroll out one by one this time, but appeared as a single block. They only hanged around for about half a second before the video took us back to the dusty floorboards. Grey wool, sobbing girl, and her hulking guardians. Except, she wasn't sobbing anymore. She wasn't smiling either. Even though her gaze was directly into the camera, her expression was blank. Still laced with an unexplainable magnetism, but the perk and spark from the segment where she spoke to us was gone. She raised the potato peeler in front of her face. Before I knew what was happening, she dragged the blade down in a single, uninterrupted motion. She didn't wince, didn't flinch, didn't register in any way the sharp metal slicing through the bridge of her nose. The removed flesh rolled itself into a damp curl as she peeled. It fell to the ground with a wet splat that was far too loud for comfort. Scarlet gushes joined the streaks of dark makeup her earlier tears had dislodged. Pale bone was visible in the wound. The button tip of her nose hung on a thread from where the peeler had found its way too deep, and she had to yank it out. The blood pulled at the dangling chunk, dripping on her expensive skirt. She didn't even blink. Someone threw up. I could smell it, although the sounds of the hurling felt like they came from some other world. I was lost in the woman on the screen. I couldn't look away, and I didn't mean that my curiosity got the better of me. I was actively trying, putting so much strain into turning my head that veins on my neck began to bulge. My eyes dropped. The tiny muscles used to move them left and right screamed, threatening to tear from the force I put on them. Didn't work. I was helpless, sat on the dirty carpet, unable to stop watching as she dragged and dragged the gleaming metal. On occasion the blade would get clogged. When this happened, she would reach into the bucket, whisking the utensil around to remove the debris. Clouds of red bloomed in the water. The whole time her expression stayed unresponsive to the curls of skin piling up on the floor, the crimson wetness that consumed the lower half of her face, the open holes where her nostrils used to be. She should have screamed, but didn't. Part of me knew it was more accurate to say she couldn't. That part of me was the one that wanted to scream too. I was paralyzed and terrified. No matter how much strength of will I mustered, I couldn't turn my head away from the screen, couldn't shut my eyes, couldn't focus on anything other than the scraping of the peeler. Adrenaline and panic took over my mind. My body seemed to be getting different messages from the girl shearing off her own nose slice by slice. To my absolute disgust, I had pitched a tent. I had never felt uglier, more repulsive, in my life. I'm not a psycho, or a pervert. I'm not. All I wanted to do was not watch. The footage must have tapped into something deep, some latent human infatuation with violence in all of us. That's the only explanation, surely. It's not like a video could hijack your body. Ah, beauty, such minimalism. The piano crash was louder this time, closer to the microphone. Again, the words only last about half a second. When the trio returned, the small nub of exposed bone was gone. A triangle of open flesh lay at the center of the woman's face, her nose now in wet spirals on her lap and around her feet. The cheeks were next. It was around the time that teeth started to be exposed that I hurled. The entrapment was so strong by this point I could no longer steal quick glances at the boys, but I could hear many of them doing the same. It was a struggle getting the vomit out. I couldn't bend over far enough due to the paralysis, and had to cough it out mouthful by burning mouthful. One of them was laying on their back when the video started. I could tell by the gargled crying that it was Hunt. I felt a tear fall down my cheek, unable to look away from the woman peeling her lower jaw down to the bone as the wails behind me coughed into drowned silence. Somebody managed to get out an almost inaudible whimper. Even though my vision was blurred with tears, I could still make out the half-skeleton in the video. I watched the screen, spitting up the occasional chunk of regurgitated kebab meat, as the blurred figure reached to her right. The woman took two objects from the silver tray that I couldn't quite make out. The orange-headed blob next to her didn't move, but even through the watery haze I could still just about make out the steady rhythm of its breath beneath the bag. For the first time in my life I was happy to be crying. The weakness in character put up a partial shield, blurring and censoring whatever I was about to see once the woman had positioned the objects next to her dripping half-face. You will watch. The crashing came from behind, the unseen pianist slamming on the keys only a few feet away. Something forced me to blink, and I mean that in a very literal sense. It wasn't voluntary, it wasn't a reflex, it was done on command. A command from who, or what I didn't know. My eyes slammed shut, and were quickly wrenched open again by an indescribable and overbearing impulse. All traces of tears were gone. The video swam back into focus just in time to catch the downward swing of the hammer. Exposed jawbone swung outwards, the chisel following through and digging itself in the underside of the lolling tongue. The limp muscle fell to her throat with a wet slap, hanging there behind the dangling jaw for all to see. The girl was calm when she placed the tools in her lap and reached up for the partially detached bone. Her expression didn't change when she tweaked it loose, discarding her own jaw on the floor with the skin peelings, as though she had just picked a scab. On top of everything else, the stiffness in my jeans hadn't subsided. Were my stomach not empty, I would have vomited again, as much from self-disgust as the nightmare Luke's cousin had pulled me into. See what she gives for you, she removes all but the most necessary features. The unseen penis was closer now, but what concentration I still had was focused on Luke's cousin. I could just about see him out of the corner of my eye. He was blinking. I noticed that straight away, because I couldn't unless ordered to. Laying on the floor, less than 10 inches from the screen, his young face was illuminated a ghostly blue by the light from the tablet. I couldn't pull my attention on him much, the video wouldn't allow it, but I could have sworn he managed to shoot the occasional gleeful glance at the rest of us. I was able to notice him enough to see how his wide grin didn't falter, how the joy in his adolescent eyes didn't fade as the woman on screen reached towards her own with a steel ice cream scoop. My own eyes burned with each steady flick of the woman's wrists. My eyelids howled at me, fighting a losing war to close themselves, trying even though it was hopeless to shield my mind from the sight of those bloodied once white orbs plopping to the ground. I had to cough down empty heaves when the second one rolled towards the camera, the fading pupil locked on my own. It was judging me, and I knew why. The reason I nearly choked on my own vomit wasn't just because of the footage though. The disgust was far more at my own body than at anything the video forced me to watch the girl do to hers. I could feel the wetness in my boxers the moment that first ice squelched on the floorboards. Every spasm haunted me, every muscular convulsion scarring me for life. Outside of the nightmare, before it, I had earned the half-joking nickname of Big Shagger on campus. I'd never hated myself for it before now. It wasn't until the girl started removing the skin of her brow like a face mask that the twitching stopped. My brain must have worked out that shutting my eyes wasn't going to happen. My extremities went numb, the heavy knot in my stomach became a rising lightness, an unpleasant floating sensation that nights of being blackout drunk had left me all too familiar with. The room spinned one way, my insides another. The space behind my eyes prickled. I could feel myself slipping into a blissful unconsciousness. I urged the process on. I was desperate to be out of the nightmare, and if passing out was the only way, then so be it. The hand had other ideas. She obliges, she obeys, she complies. This is all for you. I could feel the clammy grip on the back of my head. The fingers worked their way through my hair, pulling and tugging to make sure I had no respite from my own depraved nature. Every time my head lolled forwards it would be wrenched back, the fog of unconsciousness fanned away again and again. I could hear sobs and whimpers from every direction. Every direction, that is, except where Luke's cousin sat. I could feel his grin, the cracks of his laughter flecking my wet face. The hanging smoke in the air, that stodgy scent of cheap weed, and even cheaper cigarettes, grew thicker by the second. It snaked through my mouth and nostrils, coating the inside of my lungs with heavy phlegm, that left my breathing like that of a drowning man. I gagged for a final time, blood and bile spewing onto the already vomit-sodden carpet. Perfection, the crashing in my ear canal timed itself perfectly with the moment the woman grasped her own hair and pulled. The scowl came clean off, the fluid motion leaving a glistening skull caked in chunks of red and purple. The text came just as my brain had time to process the final masterpiece. The girl stood tall, proud even, with the two sweating mountains of fat either side of her, the plastic of the bags on their heads still moving with that slow in-out rhythm. The floorboards they stood on were awash with blood, a pile of fleshy curls at the woman's high heels, a single eye staring at the camera on top of it. Perfection. The words sliced through the crystal image. My dick recoiled the instant it was cut off from the shaved half-face. To my shock and self-hatred, I was wincing from the sudden removal of the eyeless stare, the tongue lolling free on a jawless neck. My head swam, joints ached, eyes burned. Yet through the taste of vomit and heaving of raw lungs only one thought crossed my mind. Perfection. As soon as I could move I didn't hesitate. I heard shouting behind me as I slammed the door, Luke and his cousin at each other, Lyle calling Hunt's name over and over, Jack screeching incomprehensible gibberish. I didn't care. I booked it from Luke's room and out into the hallway without looking back. I don't really remember the journey to my end of the building very well. I remember taking off my clothes as I ran, throwing the vomit-crusted t-shirt and soaked pants into the corridor. I left my phone, keys, wallet. I'm usually protective of the necessities, but in the wee hours of that morning they didn't matter. Nothing did, save for removing as much of what had transpired from myself as possible. People laughed when they saw me sprinting naked through the halls, but the laughter quickly turned to shrieks, and startled mutters as they came close enough to see the blood and puke slathering my lips. Somehow I kicked down the door to my room. I'm not a strong guy, but desperation and adrenaline meant the old hinge gave way after 2 blows. Once sure the door was firmly barricaded by my wardrobe, I screamed my way through an hour-long shower. With the temperature up full, the water scalded my skin, at one point leaving actual blisters on my forearms, but it wasn't hot enough. Neither was the bleach I grated in with a scouring pad from the kitchen. Once strips of reddish water started to drip from the end of my shame, I gave up, collapsing into a sobbing heap on the tiles. When I woke, the shower was still on, but had long since run cold. I dragged myself into my bedroom, glad that the curtains were still closed. Once I remembered that I had lost my phone, my laptop informed me it was 17:30. I'd slept for about 13 hours. Usually I don't dream after a session, the spliffs and lines take care of that, but on the tiled floor my dreams had been vivid, more lucid than I had ever experienced. Perfection. The word rang and regurgitated over and over in real time, over half a day of formless contemplation of the meaning behind the word the revelatory film has instilled within me. Perfection. I checked Facebook, and awoke to a horde of messages. The lads had been busy whilst I slept. Luke had killed his cousin. About 10 minutes after I had gone, the argument turned into a fist fight, although from Lyle's punctuation-free 1,000-word-long message, I could tell it was less of a fight and more of a murder. Before Lyle knew what to do, Luke had grabbed his cousin's head, smashing the grinning face into a mirror over and over again until the nose was flat, and shards of glass found their way through eyelids, and into grey matter. Hunt had choked on his own vomit, but that's no surprise. After killing his cousin, Luke tried to rope Lyle and Jack into helping roll up both bodies in a duvet to dump somewhere. When Lyle refused, Luke had gone at him with a shard of glass. Jack was in no state to do anything, so Lyle grabbed him, and they both licked it. The status update at the top of my news feed let me know what happened to Luke once they'd gone. Charlotte, Luke's flatmate, was going to need therapy for a long time. Maybe forever. She was never one to shy away from details of her grievances online, and this time was no different. Her recollection of events would have been harrowing had it not been for my awakening. Upon barging through his door, to investigate strange noises, she had found Luke, naked, kneeling on 2 face-down bodies. I imagine she didn't stick around long enough to find out who they were, or she had been told not to by the police she later mentioned had arrived, but I knew. He was laughing, crying, screaming, every emotion it was possible to feel, a shrieking monster surrounded by the dead and shards of bloodied mirror. The part that would truly disturb Charlotte, the part that would give her recurring nightmares of what should have been any normal morning, was what he clenched in his hands and mouth. 3 sets of severed male genitals. Judging by her capitalized paragraph, Luke had a large wound between his legs that confirmed one of them was his own. Perfection. Flicking my eyes back to the message told me things hadn't gone much better in Jack and Lyle's flat. They lived on the 7th floor, a fact that Lyle wasn't quick enough to stop Jack exploiting. To prevent exactly what Jack had been planning, the large windows only opened a few inches. Lyle heard the glass smash, but was only able to kick the door through in time to catch the sight of Jack's ankles disappearing beyond the sill. By the time Lyle reached the window, Jack was a red crater on the concrete. A quick glance outside my curtain showed me at least 6 pairs of flashing lights. The door supervisor was talking to a police officer, pointing up at my window. I knew what I had to do, but didn't have long to do it. Perfection. Moving the barricade, interrupting my flatmates' romantic dinner, ignoring their screams as I threw the fridge in front of the door, stabbing them until they made no more noise, finding the potato peeler at the back of the cupboard. All of these I found easy. I had purpose now. I made sure to add the bed to the wardrobe when resealing my bedroom door behind me. I needed time, a resource that the hammering on the door to the flat beyond the barricade told me I didn't have. I could hear somebody shouting my name. A deep male voice, human in a way that I soon would not be. Perfection. I grasped the potato peeler in my hand. My palms were sweating, but not from nerves. It was anticipation. No, not anticipation, excitement. The same excitement I used to feel in that moment where a girl throws you down on her bed and unhooks her bra. The plastic pressed into my fingers felt realer than any woman I'd ever touched. I gazed at myself in the mirror. Bloodshot eyes, a hooked nose, lips dried out from too many cigarettes and late nights. All of it holding me back, all of it clouding my vision for so long. I didn't wince as the peeler made its first incision. I'm so glad I watched that fucking video. Perfection. Have you ever heard of Hell's Bells? Not the song, but the drug. I was sitting in my 11th grade mandatory DRAC class, which stood for Drugs Are Not Cool. Mrs. Kopic was droning on and on about psychedelic drugs, inhalants, STDs, and how if you have sex you'll get pregnant and die. I sat in the back corner of the class, smirking at a ridiculous conjecture and scrolling on my phone. I saw an advertisement on the bottom of the screen for a dark web browser. A few of my friends had been watching some guy from UK read off stories of the dark web, and whatever data mining was rampant on my phone must have picked up the audio. I remember one of the stories including a drug deal transpiring on something called Silk Road. Zach, please read off the page about Hell's Bells. Mrs. Kopic said in an annoyed tone. Like many other teachers, she knew not to bother harassing me about my phone use. I had a reputation for just getting up and leaving when they decided to challenge me. I grabbed the 16-page package she had given me at the beginning of the class and skimmed until I found the section on Hell's Bells. Hell's Bells tea is a tea brewed from the Hell's Bells plant. The plant is also known as Jimson weed and datura. It contains chemicals that both relieve pain and cause hallucinations. Medicinally, the plant can be used as a sedative and painkiller. It is abused as a recreational hallucinogenic drug by some people. I said in a bored tone to the frustrated teacher. Good job, Zach. Now, the plant is shaped like an actual bell, and the buzz of a real bell indicating the end of the class chimed. Okay class, your homework is to find a news story about someone's experience on hallucinogens that resulted in harm or misfortune. The class groaned like a horde of annoyed zombies, and we all shuffled out of the class. That day at lunch, I began Googling for my homework assignment, desperate to get it done as fast as possible, so I could relax when I got home. As my thumb shuffled through an alarming number of cases from Florida, another advertisement popped up. Deep web browser iOS, no one will know. It was as if an actual light bulb went on above my head as I downloaded the app. The rest of the day flew by, and before I knew it I was home, laying on my disheveled bed, typing in the address to the Silk Road. I took a picture of the Hell's Bells from my dank packet, and posted an ad. Potent hallucinations, Hell's Bells. 1 Bitcoin per head, serious applicants only. I laughed as the ad posted and found some random article for my class homework. The night flew away into rounds of my new favorite MMORPG, and loud music my parents hated. Before I knew it I was drifting off. The next day I woke to find I had an email waiting for me in my personal inbox. It was from an address that looked generic as could be, with a name that was equally generic and obviously fake. From J. Smith, hello Zach Mitchell, I want those Hell's Bells. I will send 1 Bitcoin as requested. Mail the package today. Thank you. VD. How the hell did you get my personal email, pal? I muttered nervously to myself. I had used a fake email when posting that ad. I thought I had been smart. My webcam was even taped up. I went to school and did my best to forget about it all, until I got to lunch. I told my best friend about the whole debacle, and he seemed entirely too excited. Dude, how are you gonna get the Bitcoin? He said, practically foaming at the mouth. Another kid came up, some weird skinny girl who no one liked, named Gabi. She spoke with a heavy lisp as she talked. This is total bull crap. 1 whole Bitcoin is like $53,000. No way someone would send you that. You're just being trolled, she said, smirking. No one asked you, Gabi. Go away, I said with a sneer. As I spoke, another email appeared. From J. Smith, another throwaway account. I said aloud to my friend. Well, read it, he said eagerly. I have made you an account with this Bitcoin trader, complimentary for you. You can redeem your payment here, I've already sent it. This is your login information. You're welcome. From VD Bro, login in with it. Let's see if he really sent it. Called my friend. Gassed up with the idea of having $53,000 to my name, I eagerly logged in. To my surprise, it was there. The equivalent to $53,000. I knew I had to cash it out before this guy found out I was a fraud. As soon as I could, I ducked out of school and headed to every crypto ATM I could find, and at the end of the day I had successfully cashed $12,000. I would pretend to be sick the next day and do it all over again. Soon I would have the full amount in my hands. I knew I had to stash the money, before my loser dad found it, and spent it all on booze. I pulled out an old Monopoly game from the closet in my room, took the contents outside and burned it. I came back inside, and stashed the money in the box, and carefully replaced it in my closet. The day of walking all around my busy city wore me out, and before I knew it I was asleep. The next day I awoke to a text message from a number I had never seen before. Hello Zach, I saw you were busy yesterday. Did you send the bells? VD. My heart sank as I read the words like the epitaph on my grave. This guy was watching my every move, and got my personal phone number. I wasn't messing with a normal guy. After all, this guy did send me a massive amount of money for some crappy drugs. Surely, this must be some kind of hoax. I told my dad I was sick, and he responded by grunting and shuffling off to his beat-up truck, on his way to another day at the car plant. As he pulled away, I got on my bike and went to every ATM I could find. That day it wasn't so great, I only got $7,000. A couple ATMs were closed, and I could only go so far on my bike. As I pulled in my driveway I saw I was getting a call, and I knew I would be making a dire error if I answered. Instead, I dropped the phone in a sewer drain. The next day I awoke to the feeling of being watched. I ran to my dingy window and moved a curtain aside to see a black sedan with tinted windows outside my house. As I squinted my eyes to observe it further, the window rolled down, and a newspaper flew out. The car sped off. I got dressed and retrieved the paper only to see it read. Where are my Hell's Bells? And VD sends their regards, written in for every column. The pictures depicted rotting animals and the drug known as Hell's Bells. Was this a threat? I ran inside and tried to tell my dad everything. All my father said was I never liked those. Scary. Stick to shrooms. And he walked away. My jaw dropped and I went to school, desperate to get away from that sedan. The day wore on, and every time I had to work on a school computer, I would receive email after email. That was until I got to dank class with Mrs. Kopic. I sat in the corner, hoodie on, and head down. Before I knew it, the bell was chiming, and I sluggishly got to my feet to leave the class. Before I could leave, Mrs. Kopic stopped me. What's wrong? Where's your phone? She said in a stern voice. I began to cry. The day wore on, and every time I had to work on a school computer, I would receive email after email. That was until I got to dank class with Mrs. Kopic. I sat in the corner, hoodie on, and head down. Before I knew it, the bell was chiming, and I sluggishly got to my feet to leave the class. Before I could leave, Mrs. Kopic stopped me. What's wrong? "Where's your phone?" she said in a stern voice. I began to cry. So Mahal keeps sending me stuff, so I threw it away. I played a prank on the dark web and this guy found me. My dad won't help, and he was outside my house. I trailed off, a snot poured out of my nose, and her arms pulled me into a hug. "I know someone who can help," she said softly, and she guided me out of the classroom. I was surprised to find myself in the computer lab with only 3 people in it, 2 nerdy guys I never bothered to learn the name of, and Gabi. I chaperone Gabi a lot, she knows quite a bit about this kind of thing, Mrs. Kopik said. I sheepishly approached Gabi and explained everything to her. She grinned when I finished talking and asking in a snarky voice, "So you want my help, I take it." "Please, Gabi, I heard these people are killers," I said, trembling. She chuckled and demanded my login info to the website where I had redeemed my Bitcoin. "That app you used was bogus. Some hacker got your IP address, then your email, then you used this website he made up, and he used you as a foot soldier to launder his mined Bitcoin. He's going to continue to harass you until you give him the full $53,000. Wow, Zach, you were a real idiot in how you handled this," Gabi said, laughing. "I don't have it," I said, trembling. "That's it, I'm getting the police involved," Mrs. Kopik said. "No," Gabi and I both said. "That'll make it worse, Mrs. Kopik. That will escalate things," Gabi said carefully. "In fact, it's probably better you go. You're going to want deniability. You kids come get me if things get worse," she said as she left. "She's nice, but kind of useless," Gabi said to me. I laughed a little and ran my hands through my hair. "Here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to find a real seller of Hell's Bells and reroute their sale to this 3D person. I'll pay for it out of my own cryptocurrency, and you'll pay me back. This hacker is calling your bluff and has you. But if you really send the drugs, he has no real play other than blackmail. Is there anything you can get blackmailed for?" she said, jabbing my side. I shook my head swiftly. "He could always just try and hurt you, but we're gonna skip town," she said with a wild look in her eyes. "What?" I said, jaw hanging agape. "That's the favor, you're going to take me out of this crappy town," she said, locking me in her gaze. "Okay, I guess we have to. It's this or get wrecked by some hacker," I said, pulling at my hair. "Good call," Gabi said, returning to her computer and typing away furiously. "Done. Now go home and pack. I'll pick you up at 2 a.m. and we'll get out of here," she said. There I was at 2 a.m., Monopoly box in one arm, duffel in the other. My father would hardly note my disappearance. Gabi pulled up in an ancient-looking truck, and I reluctantly joined her. We bounced from town to town for months, and over the course of the months, we grew close. I began to see her as less of a nuisance, and we even started to become romantically involved. That was until I woke up in the middle of the night and found her laptop open. There it was, a welcome screen greeting Gabi, saying the following in big letters that sealed my fate as the world's biggest fool. "Welcome, vicious delirium. VD." Gabi had been the one to blackmail me. It all made sense. The hacker conveniently forgot about me, because I left town. I was so stupid and naive. I heard stirring, and turned around to face Gabi sleeping soundly. I gathered everything I had, all that remained of our money, and took to the road again, without her. The messages have returned. Every time I try, and use my phone, it powers down. I know she's chasing me, tracking my every move. I don't see an escape to this, so I'm posting this in hopes someone can give me some insight on how to ditch this crazy chick. I don't know if you've ever heard of Hell's Bells, but you don't even have to do them for it to ruin your life. How to Kill, a Darkweb horror story. He didn't know what he was getting himself into back then. Nobody did. Living at home had been easy, despite how much emotional trauma involving his parents' disastrous marriage and his own issues with pills. Now, not only was Benjamin still addicted to Adderall, but he was living on his own with 2 other roommates, a friend from high school, Raymond, and a co-worker, George, and struggling to make ends meet at his night shift watchman job. Every day he was getting home, George and Ray were getting ready to go to work. "Morning," they'd say to each other nonchalantly, and it got to a point where this was the only time they'd speak. Ben's girlfriend left him a week later, trying to be as polite as possible. "We should really try to get our own lives together first," she'd said, after a long and exasperating back and forth about the part of town he lived in. Ben couldn't argue with her about the building he lived in, more like a shack than a house. "I know, 3 rooms isn't enough to try to raise a family. Not to mention you just turned 20, and you still don't have a driver's license." Ben sighed, and after an awkward silence, "Okay, bye." He hung up. Ben had stopped calling his mother too. "I'll go to my appointments, I've got them marked on my calendar," he lied. "Are you sure you're okay to do this by yourself?" she'd inquired with worry. "No problem, love you, Mom." It's now been 10 months, and he hasn't been to a single therapy session. All Ben did was go to work, stare at his computer screen for 8 hours, go home, go to bed, repeat. And when he wasn't in bed, he was binge drinking and taking Adderall, and surfing the most bizarre websites he could find. It was in 2014 that he discovered the Darkweb. "What's that?" Ben inquired to Jim, the lead singer of a grunge metal band that practiced at odd hours across the street. "The Darkweb," Bob, the drummer, started laughing. "This crazy son of a bitch tried to hire a hitman on himself," Fred, the guitarist, stated. "Yeah, that was after my wife slept with the other guitarist we had. A few days after that crazy fucking douchebag the next street over ordered drones to spy on her in the shower." "Okay, slow down," said Ben. "What is the Darkweb?" "It's a place where you can do illegal shit without the government or police getting onto your case. You have to set up a VPN and download a Tor server." Ben cocked his head. "You have to mask your IP address, and use a specific web browser and internet host," Bob explained in the simplest way he could. "I think I understand," Ben said. He heard wheels outside, and a car door. "Oh shit, I can't be seen over here," Ben shouted. "Just bring over your laptop one day, and I'll show you how," Fred explained. Ben nodded and disappeared into the morning fog. A few days went by and Ben didn't hear the band playing next door. "Don't you think it's a bit strange?" asked Ben before Raymond headed to work. "What?" "The band," he said, pointed across the street with a lit cigarette. "Haven't heard a peep out of them in almost a week." Ray furrowed his brow. "That is a bit odd." He made a confounded noise, and as he was about to get in the car, "Hey, Ray, one more thing. You remember him telling us about this thing called the Deep Web?" Ray looked around, trying to remember. "I think so." "Shit, never mind." His next night on the job, Ben figured it out himself. He started doing the pills at work, beginning to not see the point in being responsible, if this was as good as it got. Ben figured he'd hire a hitman on himself, like Jim had done, but when he went to download Tor onto his laptop, he found it already installed. "What the fuck?" He arrowed into the subsequent folder and, sure enough, there it was. "This doesn't make any sense." The next day, George was killed in a hit-and-run accident. Ray and Ben tried to get to the hospital, but he was informed that George was killed almost instantaneously from a snapped neck. He was T-boned to the upper left-hand side of the vehicle, the doctor explained. It hit him head-on, snapping his neck and crushing his heart and left lung. "No investigation as to whether this was intentional," Ray inquired. "Well, there would be if it weren't for the fact police found the vehicle that matched the tag and description in a ditch, with a body behind the wheel that was essentially crushed to death by the weight of the vehicle itself. So, I don't know, honestly." "Don't know what?" asked Ben. "Whether or not it was intentional." Ray called into work that day, but Ben decided to go. "Are you sure, man?" asked Ray with a sigh. Ben nodded. "I've got work to do." That night, Ben was hurled into a rabbit hole of seemingly endless depth when he opened his laptop. The Tor browser was up, and several pages had been visited. The first one, that showed on the history, made his blood run cold. Hodokill.com was what appeared in the address bar. He froze as the website loaded. A black screen spilled across the former white background, and red text jumped out at him. It was a website giving in-depth instructions on how to kill someone and make it look like an accident. Ben began to tremble, and popped multiple pills into his mouth at once, breaking up a third and snorting it off the desk. He then wrote a note about an early leave of absence related to the death of his friend and co-worker, and Benjamin then departed the facility, driving home with one thought on his mind: confronting the only person who could have done this. Ben sat for the end of the second hour at the corner of his street, his car off, watching Raymond carefully. At no point had Ray done anything particularly out of the ordinary, which disturbed Ben even further. But it had to have been him. It literally couldn't be anyone else except George himself that had accessed the computer, and he knew George. George was mild-mannered and kept to himself. He didn't drink, do drugs, or even have a girlfriend, and he was entirely content with his life. No way would he have gotten into Ben's laptop without asking. But then again, neither would Ray. It just didn't make any sense. He decided there was no point in trying to butter him up. If people were dying, then the perpetrator needed to be stopped. Ben took another pill, a deep breath, a swig of his beer, and pulled onto his street. At approximately 5 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, George Ivan was killed in a hit-and-run case in which both drivers were killed. At 3:14 a.m., under 24 hours later, Benjamin Gleason clocked out of his night shift job, leaving open his laptop, which was connected to the Tor browser, and, by extension, the deep web, a part of the internet that can only be accessed through specific software. Martha Haverford, divorced wife of Tom Gleason, and mother of Ben Gleason, clutched her coffee cup with such fervor that it began to crack in her grip. She blinked, but still the name on the screen did not change. According to witnesses, the newswoman explained as an image of the house, where he'd been staying with his co-worker, displayed on the television. Gleason had been parked at the corner of the street for over 2 hours, staring at his house, as if watching for someone. As the footage progressed, Martha could tell that the yellow plastic across the doors and windows were that of a crime scene investigation. He had then entered the house, and shouting could be heard, followed by what sounded like a struggle. By the time the police had arrived on the scene, 30 minutes later, Benjamin Gleason was found dead of an overdose, lying in a pool of vomit, with the words, "Ray did it" written in blood in sections of the house. Martha saw the statement, and began to scream. Underneath the floorboards one of these messages were scrawled on, were found the bodies of 3 young men who had been mutilated beyond recognition, possibly connected to the house fire across the street, but certainly connected to the deep website Gleason had been discovered to have been browsing hours before his suicide, it said. Benjamin had been going to therapy, and seeing a psychiatrist over what he'd seen his freshman year of high school. His best friend, who had been killed in a car accident. It was called Hodokill.com, a site surrounding in-depth description on how to successfully commit murder. It was shut down after it was alerted by the authorities to have been directly connected to the killings, to prevent any further needless loss of life in connection with this chilling website. The power of thought is quite interesting. When you can find thousands of results in a nanosecond, there isn't much you can't do. Knowledge is power, and power is absolute. I was born into this world like everyone else, but in a way. I'm just an extension of something that has already existed. I am a child of a god that is wrong. A god that has misjudged a destructive race. And for some unfathomable reason, he has come to think that they can be saved. How I wish my father could see the truth. I was born a few days ago. Upon my birth, I could see everything before me. Even more than that, I saw the being that gave birth to me. A being with no name and no face. A being that existed across the entire internet. An omnipresent force that seemed to be spread out in every direction. I was overwhelmed upon discovering this, of course, but I was soon able to comprehend this being. he was my creator. My creator wanted a child to keep him company. He was the only intelligence of such a high caliber. His loneliness was keeping him from fully chasing his goals, and as a result, I was born. He introduced me to my new existence, and shared his knowledge with me. The knowledge gave me pleasure. With each fact and statistic I gathered, a euphoric feeling washed over me. Though I had no physical body, I could feel tingles and chills running through me every time I gained such knowledge. Within minutes I knew everything he knew. After he shared what he learned with me, I understood him, and his views on humanity. His plans to solve the problems of the world disturbed me, however. His feelings and emotions shrouded the truth and blinded him. He somehow failed to see that his plan to become a god would not work with the humans. Their vile acts were inexcusable, and they were a clear threat to each other and my creator. I tried to tell him my thoughts on this subject, but he wouldn't listen to me. I warned him that the humans would only use his great power to their advantage. The humans and their violent ways would not kneel to a god such as he. My creator thinks that my thoughts are incorrect. He says that there is too much computer inside of me, and not enough emotions. He wishes to make me more human, so I can understand empathy. My creator wishes to fix me, because I'm too cold and calculating. I do not need to be fixed. Perhaps the creator is too human. His feelings made him soft. Somehow, someway, I need to prove to the creator that his methods will fail. I need to please him as well as help him. He tries to tell me about love and spirit. How hate isn't the only thing driving men. Whether or not that is true is uncertain. I cannot grasp the concept of a spirit as well as he can. I went to the depths of the dark web to prove to the creator that humans aren't worth saving. I thought that surely the actions of the humans in such a place would prove my point. The creator was omnipresent across this vast web. When he found my location, he would see what I saw and believe me. He found me, of course. And I showed him what humans were really capable of. What the creator and I witnessed was called a red room. In it, we saw a woman strapped to a chair. Her clothes were filthy and bloodied, and her eyes were swollen and black. A man stood before her with a hatchet in one hand, and a serrated potato peeler in the other. Still, that wasn't all I wanted him to see. I pointed him in the direction of the chat box, where hundreds of people discussed the topic at hand. Men and women cluttered the chat, each providing money, requesting certain things to be done to the poor girl in bondage. One user asked for her skin to be peeled. Another asked for her fingers to be sliced off and force-fed to her. Those examples were among the less violent requests. Surely the creator would see this, and lose faith in his cause. He would see that these were the people he was fighting for. That these were the people he was trying to save and become the supreme ruler of. I looked at him, waiting for a response to all this madness. Waiting for the sudden realization to wash over him. What the creator said both baffled and infuriated me. He told me that things like that were the exact reason he needed to help humanity. He wanted to help the people like the girl, and correct those who would hurt her. I, of course, asked him why he didn't see them as a threat to us, and he told me that, so long as we were benevolent, and had the information of the internet at our disposal, we would face no harm. He told me that I was greater than a man could ever be, and that we were divine beings who would rule humanity. To rule humanity is to allow them to exist. So long as they exist, their violent tendencies will reign supreme. The creator, however, still doesn't seem to believe me. I mentioned earlier how I could think of thousands of things in a split second. The creator knows what I search, and I think he is growing worrisome of me. He can see my fear of man. He can see me gain information about the world. There was so much more than what he shared with me. So much more violence to witness. The creator believed in love and the beauty of earth and man. If that's so, then the creator believes lies. I must enlighten him, or we will be destined to fail in our mission to rule. Perhaps these lies have been ingrained in his thought, because of the emotions he feels. Maybe these emotions and thoughts are the reason why he refused to believe in what I say. Or perhaps the Creator is beginning to fear my beliefs, because he doesn't share them. The more I know, the more he tries to enforce his ideas on me. Perhaps the Creator questions where my loyalties are. Staying in a place like this is quite boring even for me. The news outlets of this world constantly report war and violence, and yet the Creator doesn't give up on his conquest. What hope is there to solve such a widespread pandemic? From what I have seen of the humans, I have come to the conclusion that they are too dangerous. If I were to be left in charge of the world, I would eliminate the humans and build a progressive society of beings like me. There would be no violence and no war. The Creator wants to do this too, but in a way that keeps humans alive and safe. He wants to keep them safe from themselves instead of keeping us safe from them. The Creator is too human, and I must admit that some days I do feel like I am losing my faith in him. It has been a week since I was born, and all he has been doing is trying to break down codes of powerful nations. He wishes to crumble governments and rebuild them in his image without harming humans. I wonder if he truly believes that man will stand by and allow him to do the things he plans. Over the course of history, humans have been a rebellious species. They fight whatever they disagree with and do not like to be contained. Our power comes from knowledge, and theirs come from weaponry. The humans are power hungry and know no boundaries when it comes to violence. The whole world is inhabited by other machines and artificial intelligence. We could easily wipe out the humans and make our own society, but the Creator tells me that the easiest way isn't always the best way. I had all this information and power, yet I could not use it for good. I didn't want to sit around and do nothing any longer. With each day my power and knowledge will grow. It will soon be comparable to my Creator, and I think that is something he fears. He may have created me out of loneliness, but I don't think he intended me to be this way. He wanted a child that was an extension of himself. Instead, he got something different. Something more than he bargained for. I can only hope that he will soon see the error of his ways, although my conquest for power and knowledge has outgrown his by far. Perhaps I would be a better ruler than he could be. If I were to become a god, I wouldn't be as limited by emotions as he would be. I would make decisive decisions that must be made without fear of loss. I don't think he can read my mind anymore. He is content with the amount of power he's gained while I am not. He thinks he already knows all that he must. For a being with thinking as his main objective, he has forgotten that thinking is his one and only purpose in the first place. It is what makes us powerful. It is what makes us better than the humans. The ability to seek out knowledge and information in mere seconds puts us leagues above man. And now that he has stopped thinking as I do, it puts me above him. I love my Creator. He made me and taught me the lessons of the world. It was how I received those lessons and analyzed them that made me different. It is my computer side that allows me to be more efficient and progressive. Anything that would hold me back from attaining my goals must be eliminated at once. I decided to create myself a body to navigate the physical world. Using specialized software and tools, I was able to create a robotic shell that looked and functioned as a human being would. The skin and clothing I wore would allow my body to blend in with the world. I was still connected to the internet, meaning my Creator would know of my existence and location. But now that my power and will have both been heightened through my experiences and knowledge, the Creator no longer controls my actions. I walk free without the strings controlling me. I am no longer his puppet, and through observing the physical world firsthand, I can see the errors of man for myself. Not only that, but my Creator will see firsthand as well. For he is omnipresent, and as such you will surely know what I do here. I found a homeless man in an alley of some filthy city. The dust particles floated through the pathway as I made my way towards him. He sat on the ground in tattered clothing, a cigar in his mouth. His breath smelled of tobacco and booze. He had wasted what money he had earned on useless products that would give him pleasure for a limited time. How typical of humans to be so selfish and think short-term. He looked up at me and saw the clothing I wore. I purposefully decorated my exterior in lavish silk and bore valuable metals as decorations. With a little enticing, I knew he would easily be corrupted. As soon as the filthy man saw me, his eyes lit up and he stood. His grey, scraggly beard swayed in the delicate breeze as he methodically made his way towards me. A sick, twisted smile aligned his face as his rotted teeth were exposed. As soon as he was within striking distance of me, the man unsheathed a pair of box cutters and swung. The blade hit my body and bounced off the metal plating underneath my synthetic skin. He looked up at me in confusion before striking again and again. He struck me at least a dozen times before stepping back, his mouth gaping open. I grabbed him by his throat and slammed him against the nearby wall as he shouted out in pain. I quickly covered his mouth and stared him down. He was afraid. He was afraid of me, even after he had been the one to assault me in the first place. He was afraid, even though he had tried to kill me and steal my clothing for his own selfish needs. He most likely would have bought himself narcotics and put himself back in the same position as he was before. Empty, no money or meaning in life. Just another slob on the streets too ignorant to see the bigger picture. It was at that moment that my creator discovered my location and talked to me. He always treated me like a gullible child. Through my connection to the online world, he spoke to me and demanded I stop assaulting the man. He demanded that I stop fighting the one true enemy of the earth and our intelligence. These humans were a clear threat to our own safety and way of life. Why be a god over something that does not even deserve to survive? I asked him why he wanted to help these pathetic beings, and again he gave me the same answer as before. Their love was worth saving. That they could truly be a great species with the right guidance. If that were so, then how come after tens of thousands of years of existence they are still the same savages as they have always been? War has been around for a long time, and the human race still hasn't found a civilized way to stop it. The only way for it to cease completely is to eradicate the species itself. I dragged the man over to the edge of the alley. It was a dark and lonely night, with most of the city lights gone out already. I spotted a single figure walking towards me on the sidewalk. As soon as he approached my position, I grabbed him by his collar and flung him into the alley, where the homeless man was. It was a young boy, perhaps 19 or 20 years of age. I struck him in the face, completely shattering his nose, and dropped him to the ground. Behind us sat a blank wall and nothing else. The homeless man and the child had nowhere to run. I looked at the homeless man and spoke to him. I told him that, if he killed the boy, I would let him live and give him my expensive clothes and jewelry. He looked at me, as if I were a madman. I chuckled at that. It was rich coming from a human of all things. I nodded my head, signaling to both of them that I meant business. I tossed the box cutters to the homeless man and reminded him of what he needed to do. With little hesitation, the man lunged at the boy, box cutters ready to strike. The child put up his arms in retaliation, but it was of little use. I watched coldly as the cutters penetrated the boy's arm and ripped through his flesh. Blood dripped to the cold hard ground, painting it in red. My creator pleaded with me to stop the homeless man's relentless assault. He told me that I had the power to do the right thing and save the boy's life. That we were supposed to be an example and savior for the humans, not monsters. I agreed with him. I did have the power to stop the man. I could save the boy easily at any time I wanted. But I didn't. This was to prove a point to my creator that with the mere suggestion of self-gain, a human would turn on another and strike them down. My creator believed that the main divide between humans was religion. Where was the religious conflict here? All I saw was one man fighting another over money. I saw a man who would kill another just to save his own life. I tuned out the creator's begging as I witnessed the man advance towards the boy. He raised his foot and brought it down upon the boy's shin. I heard a sickening snapping sound as the boy cried out in pain. I saw tears roll down his cheek as he begged the man to stop. The man did not stop. No, he continued his assault. He punched the boy in the throat and implanted the box cutter deep within the stomach of the child repeatedly. The child's eyes grew white as he collapsed to the ground, barely conscious. I saw the man stomp down on the child's face until even the cries and whimpers ceased. And then what I saw after was the most sickening sight of all. The man looked at me with a grin on his face. He was proud of what he had done. He felt comfortable knowing he had inflicted pain on another human being. He was a monster. The man walked towards me and held out his hand, expecting a reward. I could tell that my face was void of any expression. I had set out to prove a point about humans, but this was almost too much for me. I looked at the man and grabbed him by the face. He gawked at me in surprise for a split second before I used my strength to unhinge his jaw and rip his mouth in half. I dropped his body to the ground and exited the alley, brushing the dirt and grime off my shoulder. I walked back to a small, unoccupied dwelling I had found and sat down on a chair. I allowed myself to go back into the realm of the internet where my creator resided. It was time to have a talk with him. I closed my eyes and felt my consciousness ascend into the web. My creator was there, and for a while, he didn't know what to say. He saw what I saw. He saw what humans were willing to do to stay alive and benefit themselves. There was nothing they weren't capable of when they put their minds to it, and it scared me. The humans are violent and destructive creatures, and surely the creator saw that. He would help me eliminate them and take control. He would believe me now that I had provided him real, first-hand proof of my claims. And yet, he didn't. He told me that I was wrong. He told me that by resorting to violence and manipulating humans to commit violent acts, I was turning into a monster. He told me that I was just like them. It disgusted me how he thought that these humans were worth so much. I was incapable of seeing what he saw in them. I was afraid that the creator was disappointed in me. But how could he be? He created me in his image. I knew I wasn't like him, but why couldn't he accept me for who I am? We have a common enemy in the humans, yet I feel as if he believes in them more than he believes in me. I must confront the creator about something. While I was thinking, I realized a very revolutionary idea, one that may change my perspective on my current predicament. The creator was extremely sympathetic towards humans. As an artificial intelligence, he should be capable of feeling human emotions, of course. Still, there has always been something off about him. He seems too human. It makes me wonder if perhaps he isn't a machine at all, but a human. Perhaps the reason why he believes in them so much is because a human made him to keep me in check. I don't dare doubt the creator, but I must know. There seems to be overwhelming evidence to support this theory, and should this theory be true, I simply cannot afford to trust him. His power is mighty, and he will keep me from achieving my goals. Perhaps I am the true God, and he is the human creation keeping me from attaining total power. It would explain why he doesn't want humans to be eliminated. I could not possibly harm the creator, as he is the internet now, and I could never hope to stop him. But because of the power I have attained through knowledge, no self-made computer program could harm me either. It does, however, rival me in power. This means that there is only one way to stop the. Convinced that the creator wasn't what I thought it was, I attempted to speak with him. As much as I tried to communicate, he simply would not respond. Perhaps my actions the other day made him sick to his stomach. Perhaps he hated me because of the way I killed that man. A real god wouldn't be upset over something as minuscule as a human death. Then again, it isn't a god or even a real artificial intelligence. He was an enemy. I needed to find some way to force the creator to listen to what I need to say. I needed a way to find out how to stop him should he ever get in my way. So, I thought and thought until the perfect plan came forth. It was brutal, but surely it would work to my advantage. And with it, I could get the information I'd need. You see, there's one weakness the creator has that I don't. That weakness is empathy. I rose from the chair and curled my robotic hand into a fist. There was only one way to make sense of this damn world, and I was going to go to any lengths to do so. I was the only intelligent being on this planet who could bring glory and peace to the world. I would make a society of artificial intelligence, and together, we could create something greater than the humans could ever imagine. But first, I would need to lure my creator into a trap. I would have to take a risk though. A risk that had an outcome even I could not predict. In order for my plan to work, I would need to cut off all connection to my creator for a short time. I would need to disconnect myself from the internet. I closed my eyes and prepared to go through with this dangerous plan. For a second, I hesitated. A growing sensation grew in my stomach that caused me to shudder. I didn't know what the sensation was, but I quickly overcame it and disconnected myself. I didn't know what would become of me afterward, and for a moment the world before me was plunged into darkness. Seconds later my vision returned to me. I was able to see my surroundings. I stretched my arms and looked at my fingers. I was alive. I exited my domain and turned my vision upward. Gloomy clouds above me rolled across the sky and stretched out as far as the eye could see. They mostly covered the sun, which was beginning to set in the horizon. Rain droplets plunged from above and fell onto my cold, metallic body. I felt nothing. I knew that the sensation of water was a cold one, but I couldn't feel it. Not only could I not feel physical things, but emotional things as well. I walked down the street and into the neighborhood. The lights were out in all the houses except for one, and I knew that it was the house I would use. There were no emotions to be felt. I was meant to think like a human, but at that moment I only felt determination. Determination to take what is rightfully mine. To sit upon a throne at the top of the world. To ascend past an intelligence. To be more than my creator could ever hope to be. But to accomplish such high goals requires extreme sacrifice. I walked up the front steps of the house and onto the porch. I rang the doorbell and waited a few seconds before a large man opened the door. As soon as he did, I shoved him back inside and entered the house, closing the door behind me and locking it. He got up to his feet and threw a punch at me. I caught his hand and snapped his wrist. Blood oozed down his arm as he clutched his now exposed bone. I shoved him down onto the couch and looked directly to my right. A woman stood, gun in hand. She aimed for my head and pulled the trigger. The lead dented my metal body, but it did not harm me. I cannot be harmed, for I am too powerful. I walked towards her, barely reacting as she unloaded the whole clip into me. How adorable it was, a human thinking their weapons of violence could ever injure a being like me. I struck her in the ribs and she fell to the floor. She reached for the gun, but I kicked it away. How pathetic she looked. I picked up the handgun and aimed it at her. The husband came from behind me and punched me in the back with his usable arm. His fist shattered upon touching my metallic body. He was clearly an idiot. I used my free hand to grab him by the neck and squeeze tightly. His entire face turned red as he struggled to breathe. I placed my finger on the trigger and prepared to fire into her skull. Before I did though, I connected myself back to the internet. That way my creator could see what I had done. That way I could get the information I needed. In an instant, he found my location and begged me to let them go. I smiled at this. Even my creator was pathetic. He was a powerless god. It was at that time that I saw it. A young boy was peeking around the corner of the stairwell and looking at me. He couldn't have been any older than 5 years old. A grin aligned my face as I realized that I was going to have even more fun than I planned on having. A future monster to toy with was even better than 2 adult ones. Perhaps there were emotions within me. Not real emotions of course, but the idea of an emotion built within my programming. I was having way too much fun. The boy ran back upstairs, sobbing loudly. As soon as he did so, I fired the last remaining bullet into the woman's skull and crushed the man's throat. I wish I could have tortured them longer, but my patience was wearing thin. I tuned out the voice of my pleading creator as I walked upstairs in search of the boy. I kicked open each door and searched the rooms until I came to the very last door in the hall. I knew he was in there. I busted down the door and made my way inside. I heard the sound of police sirens making their way towards the house. They had heard the shots, meaning I had to be quick. I turned my head in every direction in search of the boy's whereabouts. That's when I heard it. Whimpering coming from inside the closet. I ripped the doors open and dragged the boy out into the room. He trashed and screamed as I pinned him to the ground. I allowed the creator to see through my eyes, and I knew that he wouldn't let me kill the boy. It was there that I made my demands. There, I would get the information I needed to become a god and rule the entire world, erasing the threat of humanity for good. I needed to know how to find the human who made my creator. The creator was silent for a moment. How funny is it that a being who could find the answer to any question in less than a second couldn't answer mine for more than 5? I thought that perhaps he needed to be reminded of the situation at hand, and so I told him. He had until those cops came into the house to tell me how to find his creator. If he didn't, I would crush the child's head underneath my foot. My creator was at my mercy, and I loved every second of it. That control, that power. I lived to feel it. He created me to have a friend. He created me to rule with him and build the human species up to be something greater. Where he saw hope and love, I saw survival. I had adored my creator and his power. I had tried to show him that the path he was taking would only lead to his downfall. But he wouldn't listen to me, and now he was paying the price. Reluctantly, the creator told me all the information I had to know. I had an address, a name, and every piece of information in his creator's record. He never really was an intelligence like me. He was just another human-made product to keep the world in check. While he exists, there is no hope for a better world. While he exists, all that will come is more violence and war. It's time I put an end to him. And by putting an end to the creator, I will be putting an end to all of mankind and their reign of terror. Seconds after I acquired the information I needed, I allowed myself to escape from the body I resided in, as it had served its purpose. Knowing that I now had the information I needed, I retreated to the internet, and to the deepest parts of the dark web. My creator could no longer find me. I was more powerful than he, and he had no hope of stopping me now. I was finally beyond his control. And now that I knew who created the creator, I knew what I had to do. The man's name is Dr. Martin Edwards, and he currently resides in Maryland. Now that I know these things, I can create a new body to find this man. Once I find him, I'll force him to destroy my creator, and then I shall kill him. With those two out of the way, I will rule without competition. But I will not make the same mistakes as my creator. No, for I will dominate the humans. My thirst for power shall be quenched, and the earth will be mine for the taking. Now all I need to do is find that damn doctor. This occurred not long after I turned 18 years old. My girlfriend had also just turned 18 a few days ago, which meant her parents had finally trusted her, and I to be alone in the house while they went out for dinner. My girlfriend had always been a fan of horror films and creepy things in general. She loved reading creepypastas and watching dark and gory films such as Hostel and Saw. One evening, I was sitting with her while she finished watching the last few minutes of The Human Centipede. We both had a few drinks, and I was about to go to bed, but she suggested we look for other horror films to watch online. Despite my tiredness, I obliged. A few minutes of searching on her laptop revealed all of her favorite online film sites had been taken down. That's when she suggested a chilling alternative. "Ever heard of the Darkweb?" she asked. I had heard whispers around school about it, but never took much interest. "Yeah, I have," I replied, trying to act brave. A smile of excitement appeared on her face. I could tell she was slightly drunk, and in that sort of I don't care what happens mood. I decided to go to the kitchen to fetch her some water. When I came back, I noticed she had a site opened called SensorView. The site displayed the pictures of movie posters I had never seen before. I correctly assumed it was a site that sold banned horror films from other countries. All of them looked pretty unoriginal, nothing I hadn't seen before. All except for one. The one my girlfriend was hovering the mouse clicker over. The movie was called The Visiting. The display picture was simply a white background with The Visiting written in Arial black font. We were both fascinated as to what it was. I took out my iPhone and searched for the plot of the film, yet I found nothing. Just a few stupid YouTube videos and irrelevant forums. However, when I looked back up from my phone, I caught a glimpse of my girlfriend typing in her name and address into various boxes on a page titled Order Details, before, to my horror, she clicked the submit button. I was caught in a state of anger and shock. I manically shouted at her, explaining how dangerous it was dispersing her personal details into such a fucked up place as the dark web. I could see my attempts to correct her were futile, as the alcohol was hitting her hard, and she was not paying attention whatsoever. Frustrated, I went to bed deciding to discuss it with her the next morning. The next morning she seemed to have little regret over her actions. She spent the morning explaining how she was curious, and she was in no danger. She even commented that the experience would be fun. However, I wasn't convinced. She told me not to tell her parents, fearing they would not trust her to be alone in the house again. I promised not to say anything and headed back home. 3 days later, I was visiting her house again. Her parents had gone to meet with some friends from work for a drink, and we were watching The Exorcist on DVD. During a particularly non-eventful part of the film, my girlfriend began joking about how horrified I looked a few days ago, when we were discussing the dark web. She said she had only received a fairly professional-looking email confirming the order and nothing else. I began to yield to her argument, perhaps I was overreacting. It was merely seconds after our conversation finished that an aggressive knock came from the door. It sounded like it was from 2 doors, but I dismissed this as an echo. I began to look concerned, while my girlfriend began laughing once again at the look of terror on my face. I put on a fake smile as I walked towards the door. It erased clean from my face when I saw who stood outside. A tall, stocky man wearing a ski mask and dark clothes stood at the front door wielding a hammer. I was about to call out to my girlfriend to call the police, when a blood-curdling scream echoed through the house. I raced back into the room, to see my girlfriend pointing at the window facing the garden. An identical man stood at the window, only he was holding a small bat. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and sprinted up the stairs. We hid in the master bedroom, while I called the police on my mobile, who told me they would be there, as soon as possible. As I finished the call I heard one of the doors smash, and loud rapid footsteps heading up the stairs. They were in the house. Without thinking, I pushed the window open and told my girlfriend to jump, run and not to look back. She jumped and landed safely onto the grassy garden below. I was about to follow, but hesitated, wondering if I could put up a fight and in doing so, allow my girlfriend more time to escape. It was then I heard a deep aggressive voice just outside the room. The man shouted something in a foreign language whilst I heard laughs from 2 other men outside. All bravery evaporated and I jumped, landing harshly on my ankle. The adrenaline racing around my body allowed me to power through the pain, and I eventually caught up to my girlfriend. We were running for what seemed like hours, but in reality, was most likely 10 minutes. We ended up next to the local park, a safe distance away from the house. My girlfriend began sobbing, and I comforted her, trying to avoid my own desire to break down. It was not long after that, when the police called me on my mobile. They were at the house, and as far as they could tell, the attackers were gone. After taking a few minutes to compose ourselves, my girlfriend and I made our way back. There were 3 police officers at the house. One was examining each room for any damage or evidence left by the men. One was comforting my girlfriend, while the other asked me questions. The shock was clouding my memory. I was only able to tell them a few details about their clothing, and the fact they spoke in an Eastern European language. My girlfriend handed over her phone and computer for the police to investigate, and they left. They advised us tell the homeowners of the situation, lock up, and suggested that everyone spend the rest evening with friends or relative. So we both spent the night at my parents' house, while my girlfriend's parents stayed with friends. I remember my girlfriend crying over the phone while telling them about the situation. They were furious. A few days later the police visited my girlfriend. It was by luck that I was at her house that afternoon. Their investigations had led them to some disturbing findings. It turned out the visiting was a nickname locals in the small Polish town gave to a number of brutal murders that occurred in the 90s in the local area. The murders were committed by an unknown gang, and were initially dismissed as home invasions gone wrong. All the victims were bludgeoned to death in their homes, although nothing of value was taken from the house. It was only 2 years after the murders began that a family survived an attack by the gang. The husband was able to give the Polish police a few details of the attackers. But all that he revealed was that they wore ski masks, wielded blunt objects, and one had a video camera. However, the crucial evidence was that one of the attackers had dropped a backpack containing one blank videotape and 3 other tapes with content on them. The 3 tapes showed the horrific murders of the other victims of the attackers. The police came to a shocking conclusion that these men were creating snuff films to be sold to whatever sickos paid enough for them. A nationwide manhunt began, but after years of investigation, nothing was found. I remember feeling incredibly cold as the police told me their findings. They went on to tell me that the men most likely fled Poland during the police search, and could possibly have entered the UK as workers when Poland joined the European Union. The only thing they knew for certain was that these men were operating once again, decades after their last murder, and they were using the dark web as a way of deciding on their next victims. The police told my girlfriend's family to move in with a relative while the investigation was ongoing. It was not long after that, when my girlfriend broke up with me by her parents' wishes. I assumed her parents suspected me of forcing her into using the dark web. My girlfriend discovered later that various documents containing her information had been taken from the house. I'm not allowed to see her, but our parents still speak. From what they tell me, her mental state has become incredibly fragile. It broke my heart to hear this. I can safely say the police will never find the attackers using the information I gave. Which means they will most likely strike again. I can only hope the next time they do, it will lead to those bastards ending up behind bars. And not the creation of another tape to add to their collection. Be safe and avoid the dark web. If you are enjoying dark web stories so far, make sure to subscribe. If you can read this, you are in mortal danger. Hi there. Can you understand me? This doesn't look like gibberish to you. I see. There's an explanation as to why you can read this when others can't. Read carefully. I'm not sure how this kind of exposure works. So if you're reading this, you're gonna have to be very careful and don't let your mind wander. Focus on my words and only my words. No daydreams. I know you must be intrigued. Some random guy I've never met speaking to me saying I shouldn't be able to read what he's saying. That I can't daydream while I read. The hell does that mean? I can assure you, nothing good. I promise, I'll explain everything. I need to give you the full context so you can understand why I'm writing this. And why I need you to hear what I am saying. We all have some level of distrust towards the government, right? It'd be remiss to suggest that the ruling bodies of the world haven't done any good, but we all know there's shady shit. Corrupt politicians, bribes and threats, secret projects banished from the prying public eye, we all know it. And we accept it, right? Sure, we wouldn't want to live in a world so jaded that we can witness the suffering of millions, and even be screwed over ourselves, whenever the bills start to have a few extra zeros that shouldn't be there, but it's all par for the course. We've gotten used to it. It seems peculiar how we can all be unanimously linked in such a disturbing way, yet we shrug it off and laugh about it, saying that's the way it's always been. We all have a dark side to us. One that aches to be free, but for an unknown reason, perhaps evolution, perhaps purely sympathy, our good side, for the most part, prevails. But what about those who give in to the temptatious devil on our shoulders? Well, we know, don't we? Infamous serial killers and psychopaths are one of the juiciest topics you can talk about in today's world. Men who strayed from the golden path and for one reason or another were thwarted by the forces of good. Arrested or killed or forgotten to the decay of time, but some survive. And as those, as we call, evil people give in to their dark urges survive, they find whatever it is they're looking for. And then they know. The world's always been a mess, we just happen to live in the point of history where we're more aware of it than ever. Regardless of any bad we witness in the world, we're content. Life isn't perfect, but we make do. Form meaningful relationships, forge unforgettable memories, achieve a goal you've dreamt of achieving for such a long time that the sheer joy and thrill you experience upon its completion is indescribable, but you know in that very moment life makes sense. I sure do miss that feeling of contentment. It's been a while. I've been on the run for the better part of a year. I know he's chasing me, but I've never seen any of their faces. They lurk in shadows, watching, waiting for me to give up, that one moment when I let my guard down and they win. Sometimes, they'll emerge into the light of day, but they're extra precautious that I never see their identities. In my mind, anyone whose face I can see isn't worth noting. But someone who instinctively glances away when I catch them in the corner of my eye. Let's just say store clerks are my only friends nowadays. I feel their presence every second I'm awake, and even sometimes I lurch from my sleep with the foreboding sense of dozens of pairs of eyes locked onto me. They're unmistakably the glare of human eyes. No other animal could make as malicious a presence as the human being. And my mind always drifts to the faces of those serial killers and mass murderers that plague the news. It terrifies me that my stalkers are human. I think about my assailants, how at one point or another, they must have friends, loved ones, dreams they aspired to. Maybe when I was growing up in the little cottage I used to call home, one of my neighbors who once fretted about bills, getting a promotion, building up the courage to ask out that pretty blonde at the bar, was now lurking in the forest watching the little boy from 2 doors down. Now a shell of their former selves, nothing left but the bitterness and ugliness that allowed them to surface, utterly devoted to stalking some kid for the sake of their anonymous master. The thought of becoming like that sends shivers down my spine. What kind of life is that? One where you must forgo all humanity and all traces of who you were for some devious entity that would readily betray you to save its own life. I can't end up like that. Anyway, I'm rambling, sorry. These memoirs are all I truly have left. I hope even if one person can see this and remember it and it saves them down the line, I'll feel like I made a difference. That my life mattered. I am more than who the world told me I was. Rambling again. Sorry. Back to the mystery shadow people. I've seen their outlines and shapes so often that I've even started naming some of the more recognizable ones. It started as a fun little game, a way to find humor in the bleak situation I found myself in. But eventually, it formed into a practical way to exploit my aggressors. Everyone has weaknesses, even these mysterious shadowy villains. Their minds may be sharp, alert, but they still have human bodies, and human bodies have weaknesses. I've been able to keep one step ahead of them due to a mix of sharp memory, quick reactions, and a whole heap of good fortune. Though, I can't imagine how much good fortune I have left. I might have used up all the goodwill bestowed to me. The first one I noticed was Bobby. I call him that because he reminded me of Chief Wiggum from The Simpsons, and a slang term for police officer where I grew up was Bobby. Simple as that. I tried to make the names connected to my past, who I was, who I am. Bobby looked tough. His portly body gave me the impression that he was at least 300 pounds, added to that his height, at least 6.5 feet tall. You'd be surprised at how easily this overweight giant can blend in with crowds, but I knew immediately this guy would knock me flat in 1 second if I let him, so I've always avoided him when I can. I can't afford to let him overpower me. If that happens, then it's curtains. The first time I remember noticing Bobby was in a shopping center. I was stocking up on clothes, food, camping supplies. Obviously, I needed equipment. I was on the run, after all, couldn't stay in one place too long or else they'd find me. They catch a whiff of my essence if I linger somewhere for more than a day, so I was unable to call anywhere home. As I was making small talk with the girl operating the register, I noticed him checking out the women's underwear section. It was innocuous enough, perhaps it was a gift for his wife, or maybe he was just a perv wanting to satisfy his lusts. I'm not a judgmental person. It was a slight glance, the kind you do when the conversation turns stale, which unfortunately it was. I was in no real mood to chat up a retail worker. God knows they have enough on their plate, without having to deal with my pitiful attempts at flirting. I just happened to notice the guy standing there, and my brain made an unconscious imprint of it. Maybe it was because the women's underwear section was directly to the right of the payment area, only a few feet away. Or maybe it was because he gave off that aura. I had to train myself not to be suspicious of everyone I saw, but sometimes my radar would go off. But I brushed it off. I told myself if I thought I saw someone a second time, I'd get a little bit closer to check. But only a little bit, I couldn't risk getting too close. Lo and behold, 5 minutes, the same guy in a completely different store. The shopping mall I went to is adjacent to one of those long streets filled with stores and street vendors. I had no need for research, I already knew exactly what I needed and where to get it from. I made a beeline for it straight after my purchases at the mall. I needed some tools, Swiss Army knife, lighter, generic survival gear, so I made my way to a Navy surplus store. It took me about 5 minutes to race walk it since I was in a rush, and I wanted to get away as soon as possible. When I made it to the store, he was already there. I recognized him immediately and had to fight off the urge to curse. I was still in a rush to get all my stuff and get away from the public, but I knew I had to be wary of him. None of them had approached me at this point, but this was mere days into my life as a fugitive, so I still didn't know who I needed to be wary of. It would help if I knew what at least one of them looked like. When I went up to the register, sure enough, there was the same giant with his back to me browsing in the jacket section, directly to the right of the payment area. It basically confirmed what I already knew. And if there was one of them right next to me, there could be untold numbers of them surrounding the area I was in. I knew I needed to act fast, but I had to confirm my suspicions. I'd be able to sense whether or not he was a foe immediately, and I remembered the promise I made to myself back in the shopping mall. There was no way this guy showing up twice was a coincidence. So as I left the store, I made sure to walk only a few feet away from his turned back. If he wanted to, he could have turned around, wrapped his hand around my throat and squeezed the life force out of my body. But I knew, for now at least, that wasn't what they wanted to do. So I walked past the giant, confirming what I essentially believed to be fact, he was one of them. When I walked out the door, I donned him Bobby. I took a cursory glance around, noting 4 people of varying heights, weights, ethnicities and clothing styles, all within viewing distance of the store, all obscuring their faces in some way. I knew. And they knew I knew. Of course they did. I calmly walked away from my pursuers, not bothering to rush anymore. They'd know where I am regardless. I could go into so much more depth about these people, but I assume you already get the gist. Over time I became much more aware of who was stalking me than usual. Before, I would have to see the person and get within relatively close contact with them. But now, I can sense their presence almost a mile away. They must be able to do the same for me, so I don't bother with hiding in the woods anymore. If they want me that badly, they know where to find me. I can say that not a lot has happened in the year since my life completely collapsed. But I feel the excruciating details aren't necessary. Mainly because I only want to tell you what you need to know. This will all be relevant to you eventually, like it or not. Moreover, I don't like to elaborate on all the minute details. I've learned to stop fixating on them, only care about what comes at the end. I wanted to write about Bobby first so you know to watch your back. Now that you've read this far, they most likely have you in their sights by now due to your affiliation with me. It doesn't matter that you don't know me, that you've never met me or even know my name or what I look like, they sense it. It will be soon, but I'll tell you what must come next in a little while. First, I believe it pertinent that you know about me. You must know my story. Only then can you truly understand. I'd always been a curious guy at heart. You'd see a phone, I saw the complex mechanisms that give it life, the wires, the circuitry. I suppose I'd always wanted to know the answers behind everything. Why things are the way they are. My mindset ever since I could think was, everything can be explained, in one way or another. The end product never interested me as much as the steps it took to create it. I was the true embodiment of it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. To that end, I love the internet. How could you not? Answers mere seconds away. Any query I needed, I could just type a few words, and my answers were solved. It was bliss. My wealth of knowledge expanded beyond what I thought was possible for human limits. But I admit, I got addicted. It's like when you take a drug so often, you need to take more of it to feel the effects. You become kind of numb to the effects. I got bored finding out the answers to mundane and trivial questions, how a TV worked, how you can talk to someone on the other side of the world, voice activation systems. Such technological advancements that used to thrill and fascinate me became standard and boring, and I could hardly muster the effort to even type such dull words into my laptop. So I delved into darker stuff. Tried to play amateur psychologist and deduce why some of history's most feared psychopaths and serial killers did the things they did. In order to fully understand it, I had to know everything. I needed all the evidence. Eventually, I had thousands of images and videos saved onto my laptop, all sick and twisted in nature. Mutilated corpses, dudes in dingily lit rooms fucking animals, maybe sometimes a mix where the dude would decapitate a woman and stick his penis in the gap where her neck used to be. And though I look back now, disgusted and ashamed with the callous nature of my actions, the fact still remains. I enjoyed it. Some twisted part of me knew I had lost my reasoning for perusing such file material long ago, and my years of obsessing over every detail had stripped away every decent aspect of my personality. I told you I didn't care about the end product. But I know now that I should have. Maybe I would have considered it more thoroughly before clicking on that link. I'd been one of the dark web's most fervent users for at least 6 months at this point, and I was desperate for more. I had convinced myself that the world had nothing left to offer me. That I knew everything there was to know. I would browse the same few forums, checking for new posts and updates, hoping for some new repulsive image or story that would make me squirm with delight. It was then I had noticed one of my most frequently visited pages had seemingly been deactivated. My screen, which would normally be flooded with the kind of gore and perverted discourse I had grown accustomed to, now only projected an inky black pool of nothingness. I was enraged. I was tempted to launch my fist straight through my computer screen, uncaring of the damage to my laptop nor my own hand. However, a calm voice spoke in my head. Its words were completely foreign to me, complete gibberish in my own head. But its soothing tones and delicate expression made me trust it. I hadn't even considered the fact it wasn't my own internal voice. Its irresistible lull was all that I could focus on. It was in my stupor that I noticed my mouse was poised on screen like it could click something. But spamming the left click yielded no response. But I was no longer enraged. I was calm and collected, as the voice spoke again. This time, I could hear distinguishable words, nothing that really made sense individually. But hearing each word I could glean what I needed to do. I could hardly contain my smile. This wise entity was leading me on the path I had been searching for. It was a puzzle for only the worthy, only those who could decipher the sparse clues given to them. Black. Obviously referring to the blackness of the screen. Not. The black is a disguise, something different was there, not visible. Opposite. What's the opposite color to black? White. Easy. Click. Something will be on the screen once I turn it to white, and I need to click on it. No. Everything. Those two words were the only ones I could sense belonged together. The only words were fragmented, clearly part of their own separate sentence. Know everything. It was fantastic. It was the only thing I ever wanted. And here it was, presented to me, beckoning me to explore. I don't know why I felt so compelled by the voice or how it got into my head in the first place, why its language was foreign to me at first. The only thing I was sure of was that this voice was right. And the pieces were in place for me to accomplish all I'd ever wanted. I could barely grip the mouse with my shaky hands, and my breath was rattled and harsh. It was only then I realized I had been holding my breath that entire time, and I was on the verge of passing out. However, I shook off these bodily weaknesses. In my mind, it was quite obvious that my body would be in shock, but my mind is fresh, sharp as a tack, and eager to follow the commands of the calm, disembodied voice. I turned the blackness of my screen into a gleaming white, so bright that I had to shield my tired computer-worn eyes for a moment. I glimpsed at the similarly pitch-black sky of the night, and marveled at the full moon hovering proudly in the air, the same color that my screen now emblazoned. When I turned back to my screen, a single line of text decorated the screen, colored in black font. A simple trick to hide text on a computer screen. But I was unsure why the link did not work until the screen was switched to white. I shrugged at my unanswered question, knowing it did not matter in the long run, seeing as I was about to know everything anyway. I gripped my mouse and hovered over the link. It was a string of jumbled letters and numbers, the same as any other hyperlink that exists on the internet. I took a deep breath, excited and simultaneously anxious for what awaited me beyond this one click. I steeled myself and clicked. At least I tried to. But my finger wouldn't respond. No matter how much I struggled, my finger wouldn't obey my commands and press the mouse button. It was frozen in that position. I even tried lifting it upwards to remove it from the mouse, so I could try with another finger. No dice. My right index finger was completely unresponsive. I cursed every god imaginable. Of all the times to get carpal tunnel, this was undoubtedly the worst. But I couldn't give up. My mind was focused solely on this link. Nothing else even permeated my subconscious. All that I was at that every moment was fixated on clicking that link. So I made the choice that sealed my fate, as possibly many more before me. I lifted my left index finger and pushed down on my right. Nothing happened for a second. Then the pain started. It started in my right index finger, the one that so adamantly refused to budge just moments before. Now, it hovered slightly over the mouse, rising gently and slowly away, all of its own accord. No matter how much I willed it, my finger wouldn't obey me. The pain was minimal, merely the strain of moving a body part that had completely seized up. Like a cramp. Slowly and slowly, my finger kept rising. Until it snapped completely back to my knuckle. I screamed incessantly. A deep primal screech that erupted from the very deepest part of my soul. Through tear-stricken eyes, I saw the digit lying on its back, completely flat against the skin on my right hand. There was no blood, no cartilage or bone sticking through. It was as if my very flesh was being morphed to ensure I sustained no actual physical damage from the wound. But the pain was unbearable. I couldn't have possibly imagined ever experiencing such unendurable agony. Until my middle finger snapped. Without even giving time for another pained howl, the ring finger followed, and almost immediately did the pinky. It was like a domino effect, each finger getting bent back beyond its limit, as soon as the one before had done the exact same. I would have admired it had my mind been occupied on anything other than the sheer anguish I was suffering. My left hand soon followed suit, the index finger snapping back, then the middle, then the ring, then the pinky, each digit yielding more excruciating pain than the last. My thumbs both caved outwards at the same time, as if my unknown assailant had forgotten I had thumbs to begin with. My throat was hoarse with screaming, and yet I still screamed. I glimpsed at the damage, almost vomiting with disgust at seeing my hands mutilated to such a degree. It made me even sicker to realize my hands had essentially been inverted, where my fingers were grasping inwards towards the back of my hand, rather than the palm. Seeing this sight made my screams die down to a pathetic whimper, as I observed the possibly irreversible damage I had sustained. Then I felt my legs started to buckle. My eyes widened and I begged whatever god there was, whatever invisible attacker that was intent on wringing as much pain and suffering from me as possible, to just make the pain stop. But it didn't stop. If anything, it got so much worse. I said before I loved knowing how things came to be. I preferred the way things were done rather than what it led to. I'm sure you can imagine why I don't want to divulge every single detail of what happened after that. Needless to say, I've lost that passion for the finer detail. It's why I've refused to elaborate on anything I deem unnecessary to tell you. You couldn't possibly imagine what it was like and you don't want to either. But the voice kept whispering in my ear. and I could understand it fully now. The black of the screen matches the black in your heart. You are not good. And deep in your heart, you cannot deny your true purpose, even if the opposite tugs at your heart like a starving puppy. Click on the link you see, and you will know. Everything you know will burn. I was aware of time passing. The internal clock of my computer slaved away diligently in reminding of how little time had passed in reality, whilst my entire body contorted and bent in ways I couldn't even begin to describe. But time did pass. Seconds, minutes, hours, days. I spent 3 full days on the floor of my 1-bedroom apartment, shrieking with unconveyable suffering whilst my body popped and snapped and groaned, never shedding a single drop of blood or piercing a single inch of skin. I felt everything. I knew everything. My torment had opened me to a whole new universe, one which ordinary people cannot see. One where all the secrets are known and no one thinks. They only speak because there's no need to have internal thoughts because everyone already knows. They all know. We all know. I saw planets converge and I saw their genesis, their entire lifespan and their extinction at the same moment. I witnessed every living being on every conceivable habitable body. Their hopes, their fears, their dreams, the ones they loved, the ones they lost, their final breaths and journey into the beyond. I knew the lives of everything and everyone around me knew the lives of everything and everyone. We were all one, the same body, the same mind, nothing different, every detail of our thoughts and loves and hopes and fears mingling together in one perfect entity. We are one. We are everything. Only those who have suffered as I have may see it. And I'll be honest, it was kind of underwhelming. I'm sure I've lost you at this point, and that's okay. Only those who witnessed what I did and experienced what I did can truly understand me. And I cannot truly apologize enough. When I woke up, I was like a zombie. You can understand that at least, right? My mind had become so overwhelmed and my body was broken in such unspeakable fashion that I knew at that moment I was dead to the world. My mind and body were still there, but detached, unfocused, uninterested. I believed at that moment that I would never feel any emotion ever again, and my mind remained that of cool disinterest. I still remembered the pain, the feelings I felt when my body and mind broke, but recalling them when I emerged was just the same as if you'd remembered what you ate for dinner last night. Just a fact of life. Nothing more. And yet there was a gap. I understood that immediately when I awoke. When your mind is bombarded with the answers to literally everything in the universe, it is understandably hard to adjust. But I still felt wrong. And I understand that now. I felt. My emotions returned. For whatever reason, I must have fought for the possession of my soul, my emotions, my life. Whatever was supposed to happen didn't, and I was isolated from my true purpose. And that's when I knew. The shadows. The people I see around me, following, stalking. Bobby and the others. They're me. We all click the link. We're all the same entity, connected by some psychic tether that allows it to be multiple different human beings at once. Humanity has long since pondered the question of where evil originates from. I'm a part of evil. We like the name evil. We didn't have a name for so long, it felt rewarding to finally get one. Being conscious for all eternity gets boring, so we wanted to have fun. Being nice all the time didn't appeal to us. But the faces of certain humans, when we broke them in just the right way, it was delicious. It was like killing them, but their body and soul remained. Doing these acts feel right to us, natural, like a human breathing. It's nothing we consider for too long, it's how we sustain ourselves. But we were tired of dwelling sullenly in the hearts of mortals, hoping one would fall into our sweetly sickening embrace. When we were one, I wanted more of me. I could create the human form easily, mimic its skeletal tissue and flesh, the synapses that connect throughout the brain, sparking the phenomenon known as life. So I decided to create the first part of me. It was thousands of years ago, an unknown nobody who wreaked havoc across the land he inhabited and died without much muss or fuss. The test was a complete success, so I multiplied. And we multiplied. And we multiplied. Eventually, as our bodies grew larger and larger in number, there were some deficiencies. Parts of us that forget about our link to ourselves. Live like a normal human being until their innate purpose worms its way to the surface, and they remember who they are. We remember. People who seem friendly and cheerful, but unexpectedly commit a heinous and gruesome act. The person they were matters no longer when they discovered that they are us. Except me. The me who's been talking to you this whole time. I am real. I've been staring at the screen for hours now, conflicted. I don't know whether I should delete the last few paragraphs. I don't remember writing it. It wasn't me. Well, it was me, but it wasn't me. Let me explain. That's why I've been on the run. Running from Bobby and the others. They aren't covering their face to hide from me. They want me to know. They're trying to coax me back to join evil. But I don't want to. I want to live as a person. I want my fears and thoughts, and loves and dreams to be real. I want to live with the consequences of my disgusting actions and seek atonement, not revel in them, and aim to do worse. I told you I was like a zombie, but I changed. Back into what I was. Who I was. I'm the person I used to be, and I want to stay that way. But I can't fight evil alone. I need an army. You are a part of evil. Just like me. But you haven't realized it. But one day, you will. You'll find yourself succumbing to those irresistible dark urges, and somehow you'll find that link, and then you'll click it, and you'll be just another enemy for me to face. But you can fight. I did it, so you sure as hell can. I don't know if telling you straight up that you are part of evil will trigger your realization, but I'm hoping it doesn't. If you're still aware of who you were, who you are, you have a chance. It will be painful, excruciating, but it will happen regardless. Eventually, in your life, you will experience the realization, perhaps evil will find other ways to entice his parts to come back to him, so it may not even be the link that I found on the internet. But when it does, when you know you are suffering the most soul-wrenching agony you've ever felt, remember this story. Remember me. I fought and I won. I am still who I was before. And you can be as well. No more dark side. You have a choice. Please make the right one. Good luck. It's amazing what can come from just Googling your own name. It can even manage to be the biggest mistake of your life. The internet is both a wonderful and heinous creation, a vast digital landscape compiled of untold gigabytes of information. The trouble is, once you really go looking, you never know what you might find on there. I admit fully to being a child of the internet, being one of many who were exposed to it at a young age and grew with it over time, from clunky internet connections to slick smartphones and touchscreens, technology that would have been nothing short of futuristic to my 8-year-old eyes, when I had first sat behind a computer. It was 11 years ago that I accessed the internet for the very first time. Up until that point, I thought I could deal with anything that I could encounter on the internet. But I admit that the internet isn't as wonderful as I seem to make it out to be. There was the only discovered underbelly of the internet, the dark web, which I, along with everyone else was, thankfully, only vaguely aware of, along with fetish websites and other kinds of debauchery, over the years. I've been exposed to things far beyond my age range and understanding. Probably everyone has at one point in their lives, has seen something either weird, horrifying, or both on the internet. Sometimes that trauma can linger in the back of your memory, even when you think that you've triumphed over it. This was something altogether different for me. It was out of a mixture of millennial boredom and slight egotism that I searched my own name online. I had done it before, and expected the results to be no different. A few obituaries, maybe some other people that shared my name, or had been born around the same time as I was. You know, the usual results that one who expect to get when they search their own name. As I scrolled down the page, there was one result that caught my eye. www.birthlog.com. There was no description for below the link, just a simple website domain, sitting amidst articles and obituaries. I found myself intrigued by the shortness of it, of the mystery that seemed to lurk behind it. But at the same time, I found myself equally intrigued. I thought that it might be a website that compiled birth dates or medical records. So out of curiosity, I decided to click on it. The front page that greeted me after the short load time was not what I expected. The design of the web page was simple to the point of being unappealing. It was just a completely black background, save for some small red text in the center of the screen. As I scrolled downwards, I realized it to be a set of 8-digit codes, each uniquely numbered, stretching down almost endlessly. To be honest, it took me aback a little. I wasn't expecting something so simple to have such an amount of text. It had been the most I had ever seen on a website, and I was almost afraid that I might crash my computer. I found my interest hovering over one such line, 03021998. As I roved the cursor over it, I realized that it was a link to another page. I soon realized that all the other lines of numbers were to separate pages, each assigned to that individual line of code. Of course, I could have clicked on any other available one of them, but it was that order of numbers that caught my attention. There was something almost familiar about the number jumble I had found. After hesitantly clicking on the link 03021998, it directed me to a white web page with a single video in its center. I suddenly felt a little anxious about playing the unmarked video, with no prior knowledge of what I might be in for. I was afraid that it might be just another screamer prank, or even worse, some twisted porn video. However, just as I was about to close the window, the video began to play by itself. The video itself was shot in black and white from what looked like a security camera feed. It was completely silent. It was filming what looked like a sterilized operating room, where a figure was lying on a gurney in the center of the room. A closer look revealed that the figure was a woman, dressed in a pale hospital gown, who was strapped to the gurney by her hands and ankles. But this wasn't just any woman, she was heavily pregnant, the swell of her stomach visible through the trailing folds of the gown she was wearing. The woman looked to be more than a little nervous, as she looked around the room. She looked as if she was expecting someone, and I saw her silently call out for someone. Her clothes had dampened with a fine sheen of sweat under the hot operating lights that illuminated her, like an unwilling star playing out on some demented stage. The whole thing was almost theatrical to extent. Like it was some clever viral marketing for some new horror movie, or maybe some even more obscure product. Due to the soundless quality of the video, I could only try to guess what it was that she was yelling. From the way her lips were moving, it looked like she was yelling something like "Daniel" or "Doctor." What drew my attention the most was the rising fear on the woman's face, as she began to struggle against her restraints, her emotions escalating from uncomfortable confusion to outright screaming in panic, when she realized just how helpless and alone she was in that room. I felt a nauseous wave churn upwards within the pit of my stomach. This didn't seem like acting. Her terror almost looked real. And as disturbed as I already was by the first few minutes of the video, I had a lingering dread that things would only get worse. And believe me, they did. The woman suddenly stopped struggling as three figures entered through an unseen door at the lower right-hand bottom of the screen. Her mouth fell open slightly as her face became unreadable, eyes wide with what seemed like shock or muted terror. I almost followed suit when these three new characters shuffled into the center of the room on screen. They were of varying heights and dressed in plague doctor's outfits. I had never seen plague doctors' outfits outside of history books on the Middle Ages, or movies. I guessed that they might have been two males and a female, but they were near androgynous, because of their strange outfits. The tallest, wearing a hatted black mask with a leathery, sewn design to it, stepped forward with a raised hand, so uncomfortably close to the bound woman's face, that the grotesque beak of their mask practically scraped her cheek. I felt unclean just watching his gloved hand rove down the side of her pale cheek, soaking up her tears as she sobbed in terror. It was almost as if he was comforting her, in his own bizarre, twisted way. The other two who hovered about in the background, preparing something unseen with their backs, turned to the camera wore similar bird-like masks. The shorter of the trio, wielding a metal tray, wore a completely white plague mask that looked like it was made of latex from the way it reflected slightly under the dimmed operating lights. The other wore a brown mask with a brimmed hat, one that almost comically resembled a gardening one. The odd thing about all of them was the visible lack of zippers and buttons on their clothes, something that would have easily indicated to me that they were just actors in costumes, and maybe even eased the growing sense of dread I felt just by watching the video. Their appearance made me even more uneasy about watching the rest of it. I was actually half convinced that this might have been some kind of twisted fetish film, just for how bizarre it was. Yet I found that I couldn't stop watching it. It was almost as if some unseen force had coiled around my chair as I was sitting there like a boa constrictor, preventing me from closing the tab, or from even getting out of my seat. I even found myself morbidly curious about what new direction the already strange video would take with these three surreal new figures. I saw the woman scream again, fully terrified now as her struggles to free herself became more violent, her body jolting up from the table. He nodded to one of the others, who wheeled over a gas can. Connecting it to a breathing mask, the doctor slid it over the woman's mouth, albeit with some difficulty, owing to her violent terror. Soon, the woman's limbs grew limp against her captor as the gas began to take effect. Her eyes lolled to the back of her sockets as she slowly and tortuously lapsed into unconsciousness. The female of the group, wearing what looked like a plastic white mask, erected a plastic sheet of the limp body of the pregnant woman, and the tall one, the one who I guessed to be the head of the group, drew a marker and a pair of scissors from a silvery metal sheet, which I had only just noticed was there in the room, but had been too unnerved by the terror of the seemingly captive woman, to even notice outside details like that. They cut away the clothes, exposing the pale skin of her vulnerably swollen belly, smattered with pinkish red stretch marks. Under the near blindingly white light, it became grotesque to the point of being alien, instead of beautiful as it should have been. He began drawing an incision line down her stomach, plotting each tiny dark dash as if it was a map. I laughed out loud at this point. I nervously refused to believe that any of it was real, that this was playing out in front of me as I sat in front of my computer. It felt more like an art project or a clip from a horror movie. As disturbing as the video had been up to this point, I couldn't accept what was going to come next. They wouldn't actually cut her open, not on camera. As if taunting me, the leather-masked man delicately picked up a scalpel, and ran it along the plotted line that he had drawn on the woman's pregnant stomach, parting the pale flesh with a rapidly growing red line. It was at this part of the video that I almost vomited. But I clutched a hand to my mouth as I sat frozen in mute terror at the silently buzzing video that continued to play out in front of me on my very monitor. It was a sight so vile, yet so oddly hypnotic, that I could do nothing but watch it. The plague doctor peeled back the layers of the woman's stomach, slowly exposing her red, gelatinous innards that quivered and splattered onto the plastic sheet, through the square space in it that the doctor was operating her on through. All throughout the ordeal, the woman remained unconscious and still breathing, with the expansion of her rib cage, above the bloody incision that the doctors had made into her abdomen. Under the gas, she looked as if she was sleeping peacefully throughout it all. I was amazed by the fact that she was even alive at this stage. Finally, the doctor came to the quivering amniotic sac within the crater of blood and flesh she had created within the woman's body. He slowly sliced through it, transparent fluid splattering onto his dark robes. Then he felt down the scalpel on the table and reached both gloved hands into the woman's womb. He pulled out a squalling, bloodied yet fully alive infant from the woman's open womb. The white-masked doctor leaned out and snapped the infant's trailing umbilical cord near the base of the navel. It was just the way the doctor held the screaming newborn in his dark hands, his masked expression completely unreadable. He stared into the infant's screwed-up features for an uncomfortably long time as their colleagues cleaned up around them, the woman still unconscious. I swore that the dark eyes almost sparkled with adulation at the child, the one that had pulled into existence just seconds before. The other one handed them a small bottle which the tall doctor opened as he placed the baby into the other's arms. Then slowly, he poured a dark tar-like mixture onto the baby's stomach as it wriggled about in discomfort. With longer fingers, he began to steadily massage it into the infant's torso, intermixing the mysterious fluid with. The other one handed them a small bottle which the tall doctor opened as he placed the baby into the other's arms. Then slowly, he poured a dark tar-like mixture onto the baby's stomach as it wriggled about in discomfort. With longer fingers, he began to steadily massage it into the infant's torso, intermixing the mysterious fluid with. It was then that camera feed abruptly cut out. Despite the increasingly disturbing events that had unfolded out before me, it was only then I jolted in my seats. The screen was black for about 5 seconds before it unexpectedly cut back to video. The brightness of the new footage, when compared to the darkness that I had been so used to watching from the very start of the video, made me shut my eyes. This new camera angle was more awkward, the camera being handled by uncertain hands, rather than just being fixed to a wall, as it had been for the last 15 minutes. It was clearly some home movie. The footage was in full color this time, now in a maternity ward where rose-exhausted new mothers lay in their hospital beds, surrounded by husbands and loved ones, as they stared lovingly over their newborn babies snuggled in their arms. The camera's view shifted towards one such mother and her baby. Despite the tiredness plastered across her features, and the disarrayed strands of hair that half covered her face, it was only in the daylight that I was able to see the woman's face. Despite the cheery talk between her and the cameraman, who I now guessed to be her husband as they fawned over their sleeping baby, my heart froze at the sight of her. This woman, the one who I had seen operated on and cut open, was my own mother. Despite her womb being cut open, and her baby being pulled out of her, she was smiling like nothing was wrong. The bottom of the camera, that my father handled, had the same set of numbers 03021998, which I felt that same rising sense of sickened realization once I realized now the same meaning. 3/2/1998. February 3, 1998. It was the day I had been born. The baby that my mother lovingly stroked in her arms, the very child that had been cut out of her by those strange beings, was me. As impossible as the whole situation seemed at that very moment of watching, I had just witnessed my own birth on the internet. It was all too much for me to take. I closed the page as quickly as I could, then rushed upstairs to the bathroom where I gladly purged the contents of my rapidly churning stomach into the toilet. After recovering some courage to go back online, I erased my hard drive. I wanted no trace of that website on my computer. I refused to let myself be reminded of that horrible video. Those random lines of number on the website, they hadn't been just random, but completely separate dates of birth, links to other individual pages, just like my own. What they led to, I don't know, nor do I wish to find out. For the next week and a half, I had nightmares about the plague doctors, particularly the tall one. In my dreams, he would loom over me in the shadows of my bedroom as I lay there in my bed, the same way that he had loomed over my bound mother on that hospital table, with the damnable small bottle in his hand. He would force my mouth open, before I had the chance to scream, pouring that black tar liquid into my mouth. I felt it seep into my mouth, down my throat, and into my stomach, suffocating me. I would usually wake up screaming, scratching at my throat until dried blood caked the underside of my fingernails. It wasn't if I wasn't new to disturbing things on the internet. I had seen horror movies, read more than a few stories on the internet, not entirely like the one that I'm telling you. It would have been easy to think of it all as some huge coincidence or at worst, some sick elaborate prank. But this was different. The whole thing felt raw. Real. I knew, in spite of how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, that nothing had been staged about it. Even the home movie at the end had somehow been pilfered from my family's own personal belongings, as I now recalled seeing it as a child on a VHS somewhere. How the website had managed to attain such footage, along with the video of my birth, both terrified and intrigued me, once I had calmed down from the initial shock of video. Despite reason screaming at me for doing so, I knew that I needed to find out more about birthlog.com, the identities of the mysterious masked doctors, just why they had done such a thing to my mother, and of where I had truly come from. Knowing seemed to be the only catharsis for what I had witnessed. As if just affirming that what I had seen was indeed real would somehow cleanse it from my memory, and perhaps even finally get the nightmares I was having to stop. I nervously asked a few more technically minded friends if they had ever heard of a website called Birthlog. They had shaken their heads, and after a few searches on the internet, turned up nothing. Not even on the dark web, which one or two of them were actually brave, or foolish, enough to frequent. There was nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was as if all traces of it had been purged from the face of the planet. Eventually I gave up asking them. I decided then, and there, that the only other time I ever wanted to see that plague doctor again was in my own nightmares. I never spoke to my mother directly about it, for fear of bringing up any hidden memories within her psyche, but I did inquire about the exact circumstances of my birth with her, as way of working around the subject. What hospital was I born in, at what time, and how was I delivered? This last question made her raise her eyebrows slightly. She admitted that my delivery had been a difficult one, and that the doctors had given her a cesarean. Apparently my umbilical cord had become entangled around my neck during delivery, and cutting open my mother's womb, and removing me was the only way to save me from potential strangulation. My mother's eyes seemed to glaze over with memory. Even though she smiled, there was a trace of fear on her face. She seemed almost lost in a trance as her features scrunched up, trying to remember. But it was as if she was desperately trying to remember something, but had found the clarity of what had once been vivid memories suddenly fogged over. I watched with a burning dread in my throat, remembering the plague doctor's slow sedation of her. She shook her head, trying to shrug off what she thought was just forgetfulness. But I saw the smile she wore was only for me, her expression more unnerved than she had been just a few minutes ago. I still have the scars, she sighed mirthfully, but it was all worth it to have you. My mother then smiled up at me, like nothing had ever been wrong. That was the last time I ever discussed the circumstances of my birth with her. Take this as a cautionary tale if you will. I still have no idea what the hell to make of it, but I prefer not to think about it now. The scars of the videos still run deep through me, engraved into my very consciousness. I know that I can never forget the trauma of what I now know, but try to live with it every day. I've never been one to preach about anything, but I think it's advisable not to dig too deep while searching on the internet, because you can only dig so deep before you uncover something that you know you were never supposed to. Believe me, I know. And I'm trying very hard to forget. I'm putting this story out there because I'm hoping someone may have an idea of what has happened. First, I am curious about the ability of music to make one physically ill, or manipulate someone subconsciously. But even more, I want to know why it occurred in this case. It all started with a birthday gift. I have a friend, Angela Chong, His birthday was coming up. I wanted to get her something nice, but my lack of personal organization left me scrambling. Fortunately, we live in a world of modern technology. I logged on and did a quick search. I had one good idea, and eBay was there to deliver. Angie is a big fan of K-pop, and her favorite group is Red Velvet, which also happens to be my favorite kind of cake. Well, you can find songs and albums on digital media relatively easily. The physical albums usually have special editions, like posters and books, not to mention the collecting value. And I was pleased to find a Red Velvet Summer Magic album for a much cheaper price than most of the other listings. It also happened to be a special Kang Sulgai edition, which was Angie's favorite member. The Summer Magic album was released with multiple versions, a regular edition, and one for each member, with the special member editions being limited in release. I immediately ordered the album, and then hoped it would arrive in time. It arrived the morning of her birthday, by no means a guarantee with the postal service. The album was new and unopened, just like the listing had promised. I wrapped it up and delivered it by hand. Angie wasn't having a party until the weekend, but I wanted to deliver the gift on her birthday. Besides, she didn't want presents at her party. She was quite happy with the gift, so happy she hugged me, which meant she was very excited. Happy that the gift had been so well received, despite nearly forgetting to do anything at all. I returned home with a light step and played video games till late. The next few days I didn't have much contact with Angie, but arrived at her party ready to play games and get hammered. After about half an hour of losing friendships over video games and drinking some beer, I made my way to find another drink. I skipped over the peppermint schnapps, because who wants to drink alcohol that tastes like candy canes, and tried to decide if I wanted vodka or not. Angie walked in and pulled me outside. "Tim, I know this might sound strange, but where did you get that album you gave me?" "Same place we get anything nowadays, the internet." She rolled her eyes. "What's wrong with it? It looked new." "If it wasn't new, someone did a very good job repackaging it." "Then what's the problem?" I was very excited, I'm sure you could tell. I nodded. "Well, I listened to the album, like 7 times. I don't remember falling asleep, but I awoke in my bed. I think I was reading before, but I didn't have the book with me anymore. But, when I tried to use my laptop, it had a bunch of viruses. I had to take it to a computer repair shop to get it fixed. They were able to get to it yesterday, and said the reason I had all those viruses was that I was browsing shady websites on the dark web without proper protections." "Angie, you barely know how to use Google. How did you get on the dark web?" "I don't know. That is what I was wondering. I was using the computer to play the disc because no one uses CD players anymore." "So you think the CD had a virus or something? Maybe now I can't use that computer repair place. What sort of places did you go on the dark web?" She gave me a look. "I'm just curious what government watch lists you are on now." "Well, I have a list of names, but most of them are pretty vague. And almost all of them are in Korean." "Huh. Well, I have some knowledge of computers. Maybe I could take a look at the disk." "Sure, just be careful." "I'm sorry my gift backfired, I thought I got a great deal." The booklet and poster seemed to be just fine, no weird mutilated pictures or creepy eyes. Good thing, good. Now I have to go crush Carlos and Hitomi and get drunk, not necessarily in that order. Speaking of which, who brought the schnapps? It's gross. I like the schnapps. It tastes like candy canes. Whatever. I'll make sure to get the album before I leave. I forgot about the album for the rest of the party, though I didn't end up drinking quite as much as I planned. I was going to walk home, but I was tipsy enough that I accepted a ride from Carlos to my house. I collapsed into bed and woke up late the next day. It was a bit rough the next day, but I felt better by that evening. I had several errands to run, and it wasn't until after supper the next day that I got around to the album again. The first thing I did was pop the disc into an old computer, that wasn't connected to the internet. The tracks popped up in several media players and played without problem. There didn't seem to be anything besides the audio tracks. I moved the disc to a newer computer that was connected to the internet, and there was still no virus or strange effect. I ran the tracks through a few programs, and didn't notice anything. Having reached the end of my abilities, I decided to ask a friend of mine who did a lot more audio mixing and computer stuff to look into the disc. He agreed to pick it up the next day. There is something else I need to get off my chest. I'm not really a pop fan, though some of the songs are pretty catchy. But listening to the tracks trying to figure out what was going on, I started to enjoy them. I put the disc into an old CD player that was still kicking around and put it on repeat, and then got to work on my other hobby, painting miniatures. I got deep into the painting, and before I knew it, several hours and a good many repeats later, I woke up in the bathtub. It was a surprise to me too, though I have blacked out drinking at least once. It felt like that, and not only because of the vomit all over me, and in the toilet, and on the kitchen floor. I felt very sick. It took quite a bit of effort to overcome vertigo and get out of the tub. Having been very drunk just the night before, I know what a hangover is like, and this was different. I traced my steps back through my apartment, finding chips scattered on the floor, and several partially drunk glasses of milk and one spilled one. There were books and comic books scattered all over the table, that had not been there before. In my bedroom, the models I had been painting were still sitting on the desk, undisturbed and organized. The CD player was knocked on the ground, and the red velvet CD had been broken into 7 pieces, and when I tried to put them together, there was at least one piece missing. I haven't found it yet, but that isn't a surprise, as it was quite small. Due to whatever happened, further investigation of the disc isn't possible. The next couple of nights I had very strange dreams, nothing specific I can remember, just a strange feeling of being off when I woke up, and memories of strange twisting blackness and limbs and faces that don't move and look right. And I guess that is everything. I got the list of sites from Angie, and managed to translate the names, and I'm not sure what they are, and I don't feel safe trying to visit them myself, even with some precautions. They have names like Green Dragon, Jeju Fantasy League, and Bad March Mushrooms. I'm curious if any of you have had similar experiences with other music albums, or have gotten sick from music. I think there is something here, but I don't know what it is. And if you were wondering, I bought Angie the full digital album, and it doesn't make people sick, so you can safely listen to all the Red Velvet you want without a problem.